Hey, Bitcoin wealth builders, Simon Dixon here, and welcome to Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 90. It's Friday, and we have got a lot to cover. The news flow continues as always. We've got a lot to cover in This Week in Bitcoin, a bit to cover in This Week in Macro, and a couple of things that we absolutely must cover in This Week in Geopolitics. So today in Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 90, we're going to be going through where are the US Bitcoin strategic reserves. What were the 3 acts that passed, and what does that mean for you and your Bitcoin building strategy and everything that happened this week in Bitcoin? We're also going to be covering in This Week in Macro what you can learn from what is happening in the European Union and Japan and what that actually means for what may come next in both US and China and everything that's happening with all the tariffs and everything this week in macro. And then finally, in part 3, we're going to be covering the war machines, the proof of weapons network double game that was being played this week. Now, there's actually a lot more games. We're going to focus in on 2. Firstly, we're going to focus on the US game with Jeffrey Epstein, Trump, and Musk, and the latest that happened this week, and really following the money again so that we've learned a lot more around what may come next. And then secondly, the game that was actually being played in Syria and how to interpret it outside of the traditional media propaganda. And then we can do some forecasts around what comes next. So this week in Bitcoin, episode 90, we're going to be doing the Syria side. We're going to be doing more on the Epstein side. And we're going to be asking, where are those Bitcoin strategic reserves? So if we haven't met already, my name is Simon Dixon, and I'm going to help you transition to a world of Bitcoin AI central bank digital currencies. We go live each and every week. I've spent the last 25 years of my life obsessing over the topics of monetary reform, investing, and as soon as Bitcoin came out, shortly after, Bitcoin as well, which is the peaceful proof of work in order to combat the violent fiat currency proof of weapons network. And we're going to go through each and every week. We go through exactly what's happening on those networks and how you can do that. So what happened? Let's move into part 1, This Week in Bitcoin. As seems to be coming most weeks when we go live, we need to report that Bitcoin has reached a new all-time high. It's quite frankly, it's literally been making new all-time highs on multiple times a day. And it is showing very different behavior to how it has been behaving in the past. We definitely seem to have moved beyond the 4-year cycle where every 4 years, the number of Bitcoins mined would half, and therefore it would create a supply shock in the path to mining all 21 million Bitcoins. About 20 million of them have been mined already, and over the next 100 years and beyond, there's only going to be another 100 of them to mine. And so therefore, when you are trying to buy Bitcoin, because you don't have to mine them unless you want to be involved in setting up a professional mining operation, you have to buy them from somebody else. And when all of the miners are selling some of their Bitcoin to cover electricity costs, and there is a constant bid to buy those Bitcoin from people like myself that want to exit the fiat currency proof of weapons network and save through a peaceful boycott in the proof of work network and Bitcoin. And it helps me to own my own money, spend my own money, and be able to rely and predict and know exactly what is the fixed money supply and what the monetary policy will always be. While you're arguing with people trying to figure out what the central banksters are going to do next. And because of that, people continually over time, and I can't promise, not financial advice, but over every single cycle over the 4 years that I've been telling people about this since $3, we reach new all-time highs every cycle, and it outperforms every single asset class in every cycle. And so the new all-time high is currently $122,484. But remember, you don't need to own a whole one Bitcoin. If I were you, I'd work like crazy, save as much as I can, sell as many assets as I can, and accumulate your piece of Bitcoin as we go through this journey together. But you don't need to own one whole Bitcoin. You need to get started. If you don't have any already, you can buy $10 worth of Bitcoin, $100 worth of Bitcoin, whatever is right for you, but just own more this month than the previous month, whatever the price is. And historically, that has outperformed every fund manager, every Wall Street, every asset class, gold, real estate, stocks, bonds, whatever. And Bitcoin has outperformed it. And it's reliable monetary policy into the future. Because what is happening in the fiat currency proof of weapons network? Well, yields on which is the measure, the price at which governments need to borrow from you, they're rising. And although they want governments want interest rates to go down at the short term, the long-term loans, if you want to lend to a government for 10 or 30 years, they have to pay you a significantly higher price now than they have historically in other environments as well. So at the same time as the cost or the price at which governments need to pay you in order to lend the money long time is rising, or as Bitcoin has also been rising, and the dollar has been falling ever since we entered into Liberation Day, which was the tariff policy, and the big beautiful bill, and this reckless spending that is happening as you need to roll over the debt-based Ponzi scheme called the fiat currency proof of weapons network with more war and violence and debt and fake GDP in order to create a big beautiful bill that adds $5 trillion onto a $37 trillion national debt and $250 trillion of committed liabilities that is costing $1 trillion in interest just to sustain itself, to the point where America has to grow and engineer fake growth through the government printing fake GDP to buy more weapons, engineer wars with NATO, get Europe to print money so that the proof of weapons network, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamic, war machines can sell more weapons and agitate more war through the intelligence networks in order to prop up the dollar and roll over the debt-based Ponzi scheme. And because the players that know about this, the ones that are not affiliated to America, even though they have their stocks on the American Stock Exchange, and the central banks around the world that are trying to protect themselves from the dollar right now as we enter into this phase, gold is rising too. And on April the 9th, after essentially the 90-day tariff pause, you had these events where the dollar is significantly weakening relative to its long-term bullish cycle. If you read things like the dollar milkshake theory, where the whole world is forced into debt slavery, rather than investing in their own country, they need to hold dollars and they need to hold treasuries and lend it to the US government so the US government can recycle through the proof of weapons network and blow up your country or regime change your country or politically interfere in your country to install a puppet government that will then ensure that the money from your central bank goes back to propping up the US dollar, like the petrodollar and various other constructs like the euro dollar. And the European nations have no autonomy, as we'll be covering this week in macro. Then when the first big beautiful bill was passed, Bitcoin has now become the 5th largest asset in the entire world. The largest asset in the world is gold with $22 trillion of market capitalization. In slightly behind that, as number 2, is Nvidia, which is now $4.2 trillion as it powers artificial intelligence and data centers around the world, as the whole world is guzzling up electricity into both Bitcoin mining as well as artificial intelligence. And it has become the new commodity of the future, with these data centers and countries all around the world looking to get data centers in their country, and Nvidia providing some of that infrastructure after getting the components of the semiconductor chips from Taiwan that requires commodities from China, that keeps this whole network together, while the proof of weapons network pretends to agitate wars when the whole system is connected, including the proof of weapons network share portfolio. Because the third is Microsoft's $3.8 trillion a market cap, Apple's $3.1 trillion a market cap in number 4, And number 5, the 5th largest asset in the world is Bitcoin, that fluctuates around $2.3 trillion a market cap and is kind of head to head with Amazon at the moment and fluctuates between the 5th largest and 6th largest asset at approximately $2.3 trillion of market cap. What about in the currency world? So that's in the asset world. What about in the currency world? So remember, Bitcoin is both a currency when you want to use it as a currency. It's an asset when you want to use it to own your own money, spend your own money, and have a fixed monetary supply because of that low stock to flow of the new supply. But also, it is a currency when you want to use it. So in terms of currencies around the world, it has now overtaken, Bitcoin has overtaken the Bitcoin real to become the world's 10th most valuable currency in the entire world. So that's number 10 on there. Brazil's real went down to number 11. Now, speaking of Brazil, just as Metaplanet did with Japan, they gave people with their pension the ability to invest in a company that then is using Bitcoin as a strategic treasury reserve, which means that all this flow of pension money that's trying to protect itself from the devaluation of the dollar, and Japan obviously has that carry trade where the Bank of Japan is a tool for the bank or the Federal Reserve and the banksters that prop up that network that speculate by borrowing from Japan, hedge the currency risks in the derivatives market, and end up buying US stocks and US assets. Now, Brazil is now doing the same. So we talked about this on Bitcoin Hard Talk. Look, I believe that everyone should own Bitcoin. But if you're in a different situation and you need some pension money or your 401k money to have some exposure to Bitcoin, and in your country, you may not be able to get Bitcoin ETFs, and your provider or whatever it may be, it's a headache you need to figure out. But people in Brazil, now a company called Malleus is the first Bitcoin treasury company in Latin America, in Brazil, that is now launching on the US stock market. So you can have that arbitrage between the liquidity of the US market and the Brazilian stock market, which is similar to what happened with Metaplanet in Japan. Now, I'm not saying you should invest in these things. I think everybody should own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month, and they should self-custody rather than going through these stocks that own Bitcoin and various other things. But that is the trend, and they are going more and more of those. Now, it was a big week. The US White House or the US government called it Crypto Week this week. And this is where the Trump administration is really delivering. They're really delivering in the crypto side. Why? Because the politicians want to protect themselves from the dollar. They also want to issue stable coins backed by the debt-based Ponzi scheme. They, in fact, are having an internal struggle. Technology industrial complex faction of the proof of weapons network and the financial legacy industrial complex that has the asset managers and the investment banks and get to create the dollar every time they issue a loan, and are in fact the banks are the shareholders in the Federal Reserve System. They know what's happening, and they also want to be able to own some Bitcoin, as the Trump administration will hedge himself against the dollar by owning as much Bitcoin as they possibly can. So they needed several acts to pass. And this week we had in Crypto Week where all the legislators met up and the Congress voted on whether they want these acts to pass. So initially there was a little bit of drama. 210 Democrats and 13 Republicans voted against advancing basically the Stablecoin Genius Act and the Market Structure Act, which is called Clarity Act, and the Anti-Central Bank Digital Currency Act. So there was a little bit of politica in terms of the normal negotiations that happen in passing these acts. They basically passed and said that we're not going to advance these 3 acts. And so shortly after, Thomas Massie, who is a libertarian that kind of comes from the Bitcoin standard school of thought, that also, is a student of libertarian Austrian economics via affiliation with Ron Paul type of character, and is also anti-APAC and anti-lobby, and exposes the power of the different lobbies, including the Israeli lobby and on US Congress in order to push these different bills. Well, Thomas Massie came out, and immediately after the rejection of the bill, they said, I quote, they blocked consideration of my amendments to the Clarity Act, which would have prohibited a central bank digital currencies as well. And so immediately that was a problem. Now, what is this act about? They're all about how to classify what's a commodity, what's a currency, what's a security with the SEC, who are they regulated by, what's a stable coin, how do they favor the bank lobby over the technocrat lobby and all the internal politics that happen. But immediately the crypto market didn't like this. Now, we distinguish between Bitcoin and the crypto market. The crypto market is a mechanism for fooling you out of your Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the decentralized proof of work network that allows us to boycott the proof of weapons network. And there's all sorts of things that are built on top of the general crypto market, and we don't go too far down there. But Bitcoin didn't care because it reached new all-time highs, even though these acts were initially rejected. It's only the crypto market that cared. And so Bitcoin dominance immediately rose, which is Bitcoin as a percentage of the rest of the crypto market. So Bitcoin's about $2.3 trillion right now. The entire crypto market and all the shit coins and all the casino and the millions of meme coins and all that stuff comes together to about $4 trillion market cap. But shortly after, the acts passed. There was a little bit of politica around, should we do one act? Should we do two acts? Should we do all three? What are we going to do about central bank digital currencies? If we approve one and then the CBDC Act, Anti-CBDC Act doesn't pass, then someone would be, Massie would be stuck and various other things. But immediately all three acts passed and the crypto market pumped like crazy. And so US lawmakers have now passed 3 digital asset bills during Crypto Week in Washington. Is this going to be a week that will be remembered forever? Well, Bitcoin doesn't care. The crypto market does, according to the market. So, as I said, as a quick recap, you now have a functioning Genius Act, which will be rushed to Trump to sign. And once he signs, it is implemented. So the Genius Act allows for stable coins. And I've covered that it gives an advantage to banks and the JP Morgan fraudsters, and they'll be able to offer yield while others won't be able to offer yield. But you can actually register to be a stablecoin issuer without actually having to be a bank and all of that. The Clarity Act is around regulations, and I'll be going in today's This Week in Bitcoin, some of the implications around what the processes will be and how it impacts Bitcoin and the crypto markets. And the third does what it says in the tin. It is an anti-central bank digital currency market, which is essentially a surveillance state. Why? Because the banks are the shareholders of the Federal Reserve. So why would the banks want to give all their power over to the Federal Reserve in a centralized entity when they already get to create the digital dollar in a debt-based Ponzi scheme? And the Federal Reserve simply administers the system for its shareholders, and they get to meet every quarter, FOMC, and the banksters essentially get to tell and inflict monetary policy in favor of the banksters, while they lobby the politicians and treasury in order to implement the fiscal policy that allows for a bunch of those bonds to be owned by the banks that get $10 trillion of yield that they get to earn, as well as the Federal Reserve and the 6% dividend that it pays to its bank shareholders. They don't want that. So they don't want a CBDC, but they are actually exploring the technology companies as well, launching their own not central bank digital currency, stable coins. And so there was a concept of whether there could be a shadow stable coin created by a proxy like JP Morgan that is a shareholder in the Federal Reserve. And if they get an advantage, which is exactly what's happening, over a stablecoin where they get to offer yield, then essentially it is a shift of power from the Federal Reserve, which has Congress the ability to install their their chair people and various other things that are being debated right now. But instead, JP Morgan gets to do it via a shadow CBDC called a stable coin as well. So it's the usual shenanigans that are played between those that can't follow the money. But when you follow the money and you cover and you watch Bitcoin Hard Talk, we go deep into the detail, follow the money to make sure that you understand that JP Morgan is the new de facto central bank digital currency via a stable coin and via its privatized shareholders on the stock market as well. But initially, there isn't really anti-CBDC language that is included in the Genius Act. Because what it actually allowed for it to do, so if you remember, Trump issued an executive order which was given to basically transfer all of the Bitcoin to Treasury. This was around the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve. There was also another executive order issued saying we don't want a central bank digital currency. So what was the language that was included in the Genius Act? Well, the Genius Act basically said, I quote, HR 1919 makes clear that the issuance of any central bank digital currency requires authorization legislation from Congress. So if you want a central bank digital currency into the future, then the banksters just need to use their bank lobby in order to upgrade the stablecoin at JP Morgan into a central bank digital currency at the Federal Reserve, which could be done at a time of crisis as a bank bailout if you want to take all of the banks and consolidate them into one CBDC in a 2007 style financial crisis type of event, or the next flavor of that, whenever that is inflicted upon the debt-based Ponzi scheme. So in the end, there was no real CBDC ban, but there was a congressional process for America having a CBDC. There was a head start for the banks over the non-banks and the financial institutions that want to issue these stable coins. So, of course, JP Morgan and the engineers of the Federal Reserve System, they get to have that extra power in the proof of weapons network for the legacy financial industrial complex, which is who Trump mainly represents. He mainly represents both technology and financial in the proof of weapons network. And that is, a bit of a power struggle as well. But anyway, it's not a real central bank digital currency ban because Congress could decide to change it, and Congress is controlled by lobby power. What else happened this week, which was a major announcement as well? Well, if you hold a pension, in America, you have something called a 401k. And America is the largest capital and most liquid capital market in the world as well. And I don't anticipate the proof of weapons network, even as it steals from the American people over to wealth transfer to those that own the shares. As it does that, as it creates civil unrest around America and forgets about those that are debt slaves to the proof of weapons network, it will surely keep the world's the capital market and just turn America into a vassal state as we transition to this world of Bitcoin AI and central bank digital currencies. Anyway, so the Trump executive order was that there is a rumor, it was reported in the Financial Times, that Trump's going to sign next week to allow Americans to invest their 401k retirement savings into Bitcoin and crypto. And so you imagine that that's coming next. That will unlock the stragglers from the legacy financial system. And there is approximately a total market capitalization of basically, now the market capitalization has passed this $4 billion. You've now got the proof of weapons network players that are creating all these strange products for your 401k. But now you should be able to actually own crypto direct into your 401k, depending on this executive order and whether it requires you to do it via ETFs or various other products. But America holds $9 trillion in 401k savings account. I'm not saying that all of those $9 trillion are going to be invested in crypto, but you would imagine that a percentage of that is going to eventually end up in this market as the dollar and Bitcoin continues to have this fixed supply, and you get to protect yourself from the central banksters that are continually inflicting, using their lobby pressure over government, more and more money printing, which is essentially robbing the everyday American to those that have concentrated the wealth and are closest to the money printer. So speaking of money printers, the Fed doesn't print all the money. Most of the money is created by the private banks through the credit markets. Every time they issue a loan, they get to create new digital dollars, and you get a mortgage and they get to create new money. And then you have to repay, and they get to repossess the real estate if you can't ever repay it. And then they get to go to the government and socialize the losses or privatize the gains or borrow money in the markets in order to underwrite that risk as well. So now the regulator of the dollar, essentially the OCC, and the Federal Reserve, and the bailout insurance policy for the bank. And by the way, FDIC only has about 1% of all bank deposits. So it's kind of a little scam where it could have one bank go down, but then you can find a new tool from the Federal Reserve, or you can just go to the taxpayer and say, you pay for it while we keep the profits, as we have continually seen time and time again. But anyway, the OCC, the regulator of the currency, the Federal Reserve, the creator of the debt-based Ponzi scheme with the banks as shareholders, and the insurance of the bank deposits, FDIC, that if in a case of a bank distress, they come in and take over the banks. They have reiterated the statement this week: the banks may offer custody and safekeeping of crypto assets such as Bitcoin, and that all can happen under the existing risk management, basically everything that exists right now. And so banks, if they want to start using it as part of their asset base, are able to do that right now under the current regime, and they don't have to wait for anything if they want to do that. Now, remember, you're going to own your Bitcoin in self-custody. You don't want to be collateral for a bank and a debt-based Ponzi scheme and allow them to take your Bitcoin and earn yield on your Bitcoin because they'll borrow against it, and then they'll have discount windows into the debt-based Ponzi scheme so that they can then use the yield in order to buy more Bitcoin or issue their stable coins or whatever their model is. You want to be able to own it yourself, spend it yourself, and own it in self-custody. But in this transition, because I've covered it on many episodes of Bitcoin Hard Talk in This Week in Bitcoin, I've talked about the conflicts of interest between what World Liberty Financial is doing, which is issuing its own stable coin, and World Liberty Financial is the Trump family's and Steve Witkoff, the envoy for the Middle East, their company that is engaging in all sorts of things around Bitcoin and DeFi and stable coins, and those that would benefit significantly from these acts passing. We had in prior weeks, we covered how Trump had to divest through a trust company some of his holdings in World Liberty Financial, but essentially it's for his family as well. But we followed the money a little bit as well. And we have seen, remember that Trump meme coin that he launched? I had a little look at some of the wallets, and essentially those wallets from Trump token have been heading over to the exchanges. And so there was another deposit of approximately 3.5 million Trump token, which at the current price that I was looking at this was valued at $52.6 million that was sent to exchanges. And these exchanges were Binance, which was originally a China-based exchange that then moved over to a Japan-based exchange and then moved over to a European, Cayman, and various other jurisdictions. Binance, and OKX, which is a China original-based exchange that then moved over to Hong Kong. Bybit as well, and Coinbase, a US-based exchange. And on basically May the 10th, that's when a new deposit was made. This is the fourth significant deposit of Trump tokens to the exchanges since April the 28th. This basically brings a total number of the Trump token, the shit meme coin that he dumped, that sucked up all the liquidity and has been going down since, from the crazy pump fun like meme coin markets that we don't mess around with. People use it to try and get more Bitcoin, gamble and speculate. You don't need to be involved in any of that stuff. But it was bringing basically a total amount transferred to the exchanges of 12.5 million Trump tokens from the entire supply. If you take all of the transfers and you value them, this is valued at approximately $120 million. Now, what did the team state that they were sending that over to the exchanges for? They were basically saying these are deposits in order to support liquidity operations, i.e. market making, market manipulation. And when there is a high demand for the token, they want to provide liquidity. This is the type of self-dealing that normally is segregated. But because we now have this transparency on a blockchain, we're able to trace this. But once it enters into the crypto exchange sphere, it's then in a centralized mess where you don't get to see what transparency. Anyway, large transfers to exchanges normally mean that these are people that are looking to sell those tokens. And if they're not selling them, they're using price volatility and market making. And we saw during the Celsius bankruptcy and the FTX bankruptcy and all of the other bankruptcies that these tokens are used for complete shenanigans, market manipulation. And in the case of the Majinsky that just went down for 12 years, he was using the Cell token in order to pump the price, hide all the fraud that was happening on the balance sheet of his Ponzi scheme called Celsius, and engage in all sorts of crimes and then borrow against it and steal money through stable coins and all sorts of shenanigans. Not saying any of those things are happening, but you need to be aware of these things. Anyway, Trump's World Liberty Financial is also accumulating lots of Ethereum. And so Ethereum is the second largest cryptocurrency. It's a proof of stake network rather than a proof of work network. What that means is that by owning the ETH token, you get a vote in the governance and validation fees in the network, which is different to a proof of work network. So by owning ETH, and there was a pre-mine, you get to have significant control over the network. Unlike Bitcoin, if Bitcoin, whoever owns it, it doesn't matter. By owning Bitcoin, it doesn't give you control over the network because it works off a proof of work mechanism. There's different players involved in that. Anyway, Ethereum basically added about this week $150 billion in market cap ever since July the 1st. So the market cap has been increasing significantly. After a long time, multiple years of underperforming Bitcoin, it entered into an overperforming phase. Now, because it was significantly having a very bad market, there was massive short exposure with speculators using derivatives in order to try and profit from Ethereum going down. But the short exposure basically reached record highs, and the net short exposure was approximately 25% above levels that were seen in, say, February 2025. So there was a massive amount of short exposure, which means derivatives are betting on Ethereum going down. But this month, and around the time that the World Liberty Financial was accumulating and all of these acts were passing and various other things were happening, the price of ETH this month surged, well, basically less than a month, approximately 70%. And so that created one of the largest short squeezes that we've seen in crypto history. A short squeeze is essentially where you're borrowing the crypto in order to short the crypto on leverage. And then as the price goes up, you need to cover that short position by buying more of it. And then that creates a self-perpetuating short squeeze where essentially the price keeps going up in order to cover some of those leverage short positions. And as a result, we basically saw billions of dollars in liquidated shorts. It wiped out many of those short sellers. And heading into July the 1st, essentially, BlackRock's ETF was adding more and more Ethereum. In fact, during this period, 29 of the previous 30 days were net inflows, which leads to buying more shares in the Ethereum ETF, which means BlackRock has to buy more Bitcoin. So BlackRock has been accumulating their position leading into this short squeeze as well. And then what did we get? Basically, announced on the stock market was an ETH treasury company headed by, I think his name is Tommy Lee as well. And suddenly he's an ETH maxi, and we start to get these big price increases in stocks that are holding ETH on their balance sheet, like a Bitcoin treasury company. And then what do we get? We get an announcement around the time that these acts are passing that BlackRock is now filing with the SEC to take all the Ethereum that is held in the Ethereum ETF and stake it. And because proof of stake means those that hold the token, even if for somebody else, stakes it, then they control the governance of that network. And if BlackRock is now going to be launching tokenized exchanges and is going to be using Ethereum as that mechanism, like it has with Securitize and Biddle with their tokenized treasuries, then they are accumulating a position. And this is exactly why proof of work was created the way that it was, rather than proof of stake, because owning the Bitcoin in a Bitcoin ETF does not mean that you control the network or the governance of it, but it does with Ethereum ETF. So once BlackRock essentially controls the ETH stakes, you'll find out why Bitcoin proof of work matters, as some of those code changes happen and things happen with stablecoins being listed, and this network becomes centrally controlled with some of the largest pools of capital. Now, under the Clarity Act, they decided to create a process for how these different types of crypto tokens would be classified as either being regulated by the securities regulator, i.e. the Securities and Exchange Commission, or being classified as a commodity which is sufficiently decentralized. And basically, they created a definition which is called a mature blockchain system. And in the Clarity Act, it defined a mature blockchain system as a blockchain that is, quote, that is not controlled by any person or group of persons under common control. And so basically, projects can now gain this status by certifying themselves with the SEC. So the SEC is now going to become the arbitrage of whether these things are decentralized or not. This basically involves a project issuer, and if there is a foundation and a person to apply, this is why Bitcoin is so different. There was no way of applying to the SEC. There was no one to make that application. There was no foundation that controls and changes the codes and various other things. But essentially, it basically involves the project demonstrating that it is decentralized, and it needs to demonstrate it to the SEC in terms of decentralized governance, decentralized development in terms of open source, decentralized operations, and the maturity status leads to basically a lighter regulation and the treatment of the basically associated digital asset as now being a digital commodity rather than a security. Now, the real difference with that is that you now go through a certification process. The project issuer must file this maturity certification, and the SEC is going to be doing it. The SEC makes the evaluation, and there'll be a team to do that. It needs to demonstrate the decentralized nature of this. Now, the certification is going to become effective if the SEC does not object. So you apply, the SEC does not object. And now you are classified, and now exchanges can list you and treat you as a digital commodity rather than a security. And so at this point, basically, the crypto is considered mature and subject to reduced regulatory obligations. And the Clarity Act, in its opening, decided to take 3 assets that is already classified as mature. One of them is Bitcoin, obviously. The other is ETH. And the other is Cardano, ADA, as already being certified and exempt from the SEC. We also know that the founder of Cardano, Charles Hoskinson, was a big contributor to the crypto lobby when installing Trump in order to get this crypto legislation and regulations, and was hugely likely involved in all of these processes, because there is now a big crypto lobby that exists, and Bitcoin doesn't really lobby because Bitcoin doesn't have any central counterparties that print these tokens and lobby to try and get these favorable treatments. Now, the big difference, of course, is if you get treated as a security, I know this is a little bit geeky, then securities are subject to what's known as accredited investor rules, which means that you can only buy those if you're exempt by being a high net worth investor. And if you are not a high net worth investor, then you may not qualify in order to invest in these different exemptions, which is a huge amount of the liquidity. So this could suck a lot of liquidity out of tokens and push them into those that are certified already. And this is essentially, with the exception of Bitcoin, a way of SEC regulatory capture and arbitrator of who is sufficiently decentralized when there is a centralized counterparty that will be applying for that. And guess what? It will be lobby pressure and shadow Fed chairs, just like SBF when he was involved in Operation Choke Point 2.0, a Federal Reserve operation to hand over parts of the market to BlackRock and the TradFi players. And SBF was the only one that could meet with the chair, Gary Gensler, of the SEC during the Biden administration, and therefore was the only one that was drafting legislation for the crypto market that meant that it would lead to having to use an exchange or a hedge fund like Alameda Research, which was a massive PSYOP fraud in order to create distress in the market and profit from the pumps and dumps and all the bankruptcies that all of the those in the know at the proof of weapons network were bidding on all those assets in the cheap at the bottom of the market. Everybody that had Bitcoin at FTX got like $16,000 for their Bitcoin. Today, it is worth approximately $117,000. That excess value went to paying lawyers, banksters, $1 billion that was spent in the bankruptcy process. Anyway, what this also highlights is that when you have things like the Clarity Act, people tend to circumvent adding utility to these different types of securities, tokens, whatever we're going to call them now. This is why prior to the Clarity Act, a meme coin exchange or a meme coin decentralized marketplace, whatever you want to call it, Pump Fun, which I don't use for all of these meme coins, they essentially launched a utility token with no utility because they're trying to make sure that they're not classified as security. And so a bunch of people invest $500 million, $500 million to buy this token that does nothing and is not even connected to the exchange in any way. But hopefully with this, it could be classified as security, but then you have all of the different types of rules. So this is regulatory capture of the shitcoinery part of the market and the reason why Bitcoin exists. And obviously BlackRock is favoring their token that they're accumulating the stakes in as we list into the stable coins and various other real world assets in these tokenized exchanges, which is why in the end, everything comes back to the resistance of Bitcoin proof of work, because it doesn't require any of this these types of regulators or approvals or human failures or anything around it. And so, prior to the Clarity Act commencement, they couldn't have any connection to the business because they didn't want to fall under the Securities Act. And so therefore investors get this shit token that does nothing and then maybe later they can connect it to the business as this clarity comes through. Anyway, few more news. I told you there's a lot on the Bitcoin side. We've got a few more stories, and we're going to also give a little bit of updates. It's going to take the majority of Bitcoin Hard Talk today, and then we're going to move over to a shorter macro section, and we'll try and get all this done in the 3 parts. Right. If you're enjoying this, now let's move over to what's happening with some of the companies, the Bitcoin treasury companies. So Strategy has now become the first publicly traded Bitcoin company in America or the world that now owns over 600,000 Bitcoin. So of the 21 million Bitcoin, 601,550 of them sit on the balance sheet with Coinbase custody in Strategy, which is a publicly traded company. So Strategy shareholders get exposure to 3% of all of the Bitcoin with a promise that they will never sell it, and they will continue buying the top forever. And so people are paying a premium because they're using their operational business on top of that. I don't recommend messing around with these things, but sometimes in your pension and various other things, people are using these products. Now, Vanguard, which is one of the largest players in the proof of weapons network, you've got large asset managers like BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, and then you've got other types of investment banks like JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs. And then you got retail brokers like Morgan Stanley, and then you got the creators of money like Chase Bank and Citibank. This makes up the financial industrial complex division of the proof of weapons network. And at top are the asset managers that pull together all of your money, insurance money, endowment money from universities, pension money, and they package it all together into ETFs. And by doing this, they get the board seats and they get the voting power in many of the 20,000 companies that they own shares in. But one of the vital players, which is a private player, Vanguard, is now the biggest shareholders of Strategy. And so they have indirect exposure to Bitcoin, but at the same time of BlackRock and State Street, Vanguard is the only one that is not embracing offering Bitcoin ETFs or Bitcoin products to their clients. So they still won't offer Bitcoin to their customers, but they are the largest shareholder in Strategy because they want Bitcoin exposure as well via these types of mechanisms as well. And obviously, there's difference between actively managed funds and passive funds and various other things, but let's not go into the detail for this. So what comes next? Now, remember what we said earlier, that the Financial Times reported that Trump is going to be signing an executive order. They said this week, maybe it comes next week, but it will allow 401k retirement plans to invest in crypto. So even if Vanguard is resisting for either front run or regulatory reasons or whatever it is, everyone that's got a 401k is now going to be able to have Bitcoin in their 401k. And if they can do it via BlackRock and State Street and others, then Vanguard is going to be capitulated into the market, which is complete exposure to all the different players that have to now allow retirement funds to be protected by having Bitcoin in their retirement funds as well. Now, remember, I always say self-custody is the true power. But I'm going to go a little bit into how you can make those decisions, because it's quite nuanced between self-custody and custody. And I want to give you some resources so that you can actually practically make some of those decisions as well. Just before we do that, we've got a few more stories. If you're in Australia, Bitcoin holders can now, just like in the US with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, they can now use their crypto as collateral in order to take out mortgages, so it can be part of your net worth. And if you are in France, France lawmakers have now proposed basically a 5-year Bitcoin mining pilot program, which is going to be taking excess electricity in France, take the surplus wasted electricity and utilize it for Bitcoin mining in order to stabilize some of the electricity grids. Which is something that happens in Texas, happens in Kingdom of Bhutan, happens around the world with different players in different African nations as well. So now we've got European nations, and France is going to be the first one that I'm aware of that is going to be utilizing Bitcoin mining in order to make their mining grid and utilize wasted electricities as well. Now, remember on the surveillance side, because on the AI side, we've always been covering it. There was an announcement that Elon Musk, I'll be covering more on Elon Musk in the macro section as well, but XAI announced that it has got Grok for governments. Yikes. Basically their first contract is with the US Department of Defense. And so while Palantir is using artificial intelligence to do genocide as a service in Gaza, occupation as a service in West Bank, drones as a service in Ukraine, surveillance as a service in UK, Hajj as a service in Saudi Arabia, surveillance and as a service, state surveillance and CCTV and various other things as a surveillance in Europe, and also pretend border service in America so it can be used against the American people. Now the beta tests are through. You've also got XAI, which are the PayPal mafias, Peter Thiel behind Palantir, Elon Musk behind X and XAI, and Tesla and various other massive data centers, Doge. All of that data in the big, beautiful bill can all be consolidated and rolled up and used with contracts at the Department of Defense. Initially, they'll say it's borders. Then they'll use it on you, just like Patriot Act and various other legislation that can be used so that they can start defending and using and building those social credit scores and various other things, which is why we need decentralized data. And they can integrate, Musk is definitely going to be issuing a stable coin now. They have Genius Act, and then likely will be using X data for social credit scoring. And more banksters are essentially jumping on board these different types of psyop crypto assets. But hopefully you understand that Bitcoin proof of work is your resistance against it, even though with your spending money, you may need to engage in some of these banksters projects. So I guess I've got to list off my little updates from the deep state actors at the proof of weapons network that are now deciding how they can engage in this. So let's lift off some of those projects. This week alone, Standard Chartered launched their spot Bitcoin trading for institutional clients in the UK. The $700 billion Deutsche Bank, which was a product of the Nazi regime after the Bank for International Settlements handed over much of the gold through the Federal Reserve and the closing of the Reichsbank and the opening of the bank, the central bank. And then you had the chosen Deutsche Bank. They're going to be offering Bitcoin as it is now basically said that it is maturing and that pensions and sovereign wealth funds will be the next to basically allocate funds to Bitcoin and the market. The number one shareholder in the Federal Reserve, JP Morgan, and Jeffrey Epstein's bankster, the CEO Jamie Dimon, that settled $280 million with Jeffrey Epstein victims as a result of facilitating this pedophilia network. Their company said that they will get involved in crypto stable coins. They're already involved in stable coins because they were involved in their lobby money to make sure they were the only shareholder of the Federal Reserve that could issue yield on their stable coins. Speaking of the PayPal mafia, the PayPal ex-co-founder, Peter Thiel, the Palantir financial terrorist, has basically now acquired a 9.1% stake in BitMine, which is one of the largest Bitcoin mining companies out there. The Bank of America expects to launch a crypto stablecoin. That was reported by Reuters this week. And one of the people that were mentioned in the white paper, Adam Back, that created a company called Blockstream that had a bunch of Bitcoin, has now gone full on deep state and is engaging with financial terrorists like Howard Lutnick, who created Cantor Fitzgerald, who basically is the neighbor of Jeffrey Epstein, that is deeply connected to Mossad and always sits behind Trump whenever he's handling Trump at important meetings, like his recent comment this week. We'll be covering a bit more about that in the macro section. But anyway, Adam Back has decided that he's going to be launching a new Bitcoin treasury company, BSTR, and it's going to be launching with 30,021 Bitcoins that are going to be instantly going to become basically the fourth largest Bitcoin treasury company on the New York Stock Exchange. That's basically a $1.5 billion cash allocation in funding, and this will make it the biggest SPAC. A SPAC is where you buy a shell public company, then you reverse merger a business into it. And what is he doing? He's basically doing Cantor Fitzgerald financial engineering, because when you live in the US, you have to go through all these crazy tax structures in order to do a deal. So while they'll be saying that this is a game-changing company, look, you might get a pump and dump out of it. Stick with Bitcoin. You don't need to know any of this stuff, but I want to give you the detail so that you can understand the crazy shenanigans that are being played, because TradFi wants your Bitcoin and they don't want you to own it in self-custody. When they want you to do that, you should do the opposite. So basically, Cantor Fitzgerald is raising this $4 billion SPAC deal with Adam Back, using Adam Back's reputation to buy billions of dollars of Bitcoin. This I consider the opposite of the cypherpunk movement, and it should be condoned. But why are they actually doing it? I looked a little bit deeper into that. Basically, you're doing business with Jeffrey Epstein's neighbor's firm, and basically Trump's Mossad handler, from my perspective, allegedly. I'll give you a little bit more in this week in macro, the connection between everything that's happening with the Epstein files and Trump. But basically, it's a tax incentive. Blockstream, I'm guessing, has a shitload of Bitcoin held upon its company. From my understanding, Blockstream is a Canadian company. And what it will probably be doing is transferring the Bitcoin through some kind of mechanism from Blockstream to the SPAC, transfer that Bitcoin over. Then the Bitcoin they're hoping will trade at a premium to the Bitcoin value by having a bunch of pump and dump artists that manipulate the price or do whatever they're going to do with the price, so that the stock trades higher than the net asset value of the Bitcoin. And then Adam Back or Blockstream or Cantor or whoever can use the stock as collateral, borrow against the stock, and turn a beautiful asset, Bitcoin, into a construct of the debt-based fiat currency Ponzi scheme, because it has tax benefits in order to do that as well. And it will be backed by a stock which has got some Bitcoin in it, and essentially constructing a Bitcoin structured product. And more of these are going to be coming, and they want you to buy their stock with some Bitcoin rather than you just owning the Bitcoin itself. So you can either be a product of Bitcoin structure. Okay, so now I've been warning people against borrowing against their Bitcoin and the risks. I'm not going to go through all of that today. I told you we got a long one in the Bitcoin side today. But Bitcoin-backed loans has now crossed $1 billion in collateral on Coinbase. And so as this fiat currency product network and structured products through all of the ecosystem is building, and people are going to be doing that. Make sure you watch some previous videos on my warnings. Make sure you risk manage these things. If not, avoid these things altogether. I've been given many of these different things. Anyway, hopefully, and I say hopefully, we're going to play Azad. You can pull up their AI video soon. We're going to go straight into this. My hope is that you understand the difference between self-custody and custody. And so to try and help you with that, I did a bit of a debate with people that support TradFi, come from TradFi, and some of the cypherpunk movements and people like myself that really encourage self-custody. with also some of the nuance of understanding that there is tax, inheritance, and various other considerations as well. So while I'll tell you what I think you should be doing, at the same time, I recognize that there is different types of elements and pension products and various other things. But my hope is that now these acts are passed, there is strong protections for you to be able to self-custody. But I haven't read through everything, and I'm hoping the Twitter sphere of lawyers and FinTwit are going to go out there and make sure that there aren't too many problems in terms of allowing Americans to self-custody. And so what I wanted to do, I've got one more major story to cover in the Bitcoin section. It's a longer section than usual, which is on the Bitcoin strategic reserves. And just before that, I wanted to give a little AI summary of a blog post that I think is going out today. I'm not sure if it's live yet now, or will be live shortly after this, and we'll link to it in the description, of just give you a little AI summary of a debate around to self-custody, to custody, or to self-custody, and a bit of a debate so that you can have that educational content. If you want to watch it yourself, the full one with a blog and summary and links to resources, head over to simondixon.com, click on the blog link, and type in custody in the search field, or you'll just find it as on page 1, depending on when you're watching this. So just to give you a little bit of a teaser of the content and the TLDR for those that don't read it, Azad, let's now play the AI summary of to custody or self-custody.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling a really big question. It's technical, sure, but also kind of philosophical.
Yeah.
Once you actually own Bitcoin, how do you store it?
Mm-hmm.
We're going to dive into this debate that flared up, I think it was July 1st, 2025. And we're using Simon Dixon's blog as a guide. He was right in the middle of it.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because it really highlights this core tension, doesn't it? It's this battle between keeping Bitcoin pure to its original ideas and, well, making it practical for everyone to use.
Right.
But Dixon's first piece of advice is constant advice, really, to you, the listeners. Super simple. Just get off zero.
Meaning just own some Bitcoin, anything.
Exactly. Own any Bitcoin. And, you know, the kicker is he's been saying for 14 years, just buy a bit more each month. Simple rule.
And that simple rule,
For anyone who's stuck with it for at least 4 years, Bitcoin has beaten, well, every other asset class. That's quite a track record.
it really is. Okay, so let's unpack the two main sides of this storage debate. First up, the argument for self-custody. People like Simon Dixon, Dustin Stockton.
Right. They see self-custody as, like, vital for the soul of Bitcoin.
The soul of Bitcoin. What does that mean in practice?
It comes down to those original revolutionary ideas, you know? Money you can actually own, money you can spend without asking permission, and that fixed supply.
Okay, so the ownership part is key.
Absolutely. Because if you use a custodian, like an exchange or a bank, you just have an IOU. It's not really yours in the same way. You need their okay to spend it.
Which opens the door to censorship.
Precisely. Dixon even calls self-custody a way to boycott what he terms the proof of weapons network, basically bypassing the traditional financial system, the Fed, big players like BlackRock.
And Dustin Stockton had that really powerful story.
Oh, yeah. That was quite something.
He was apparently debanked, kicked out of 8 banks, he said, for political reasons. And he survived for 4 years with no bank account.
That's self-custodied Bitcoin.
That just makes it so real, doesn't it? It's not theory anymore.
No.
It shows why self-sovereignty matters, especially if you might face censorship like that.
It really underscores the point, but then there's the other side.
Right, the pragmatists, the ones focused on mass adoption.
Uh-huh. People like Joe Carlosar, Gary Cardone, their focus is bringing in the next billion Bitcoin users. And for them, that means it has to be easy, low friction.
No complex stuff.
Exactly. Carlosar basically called self-custody a usability nightmare. You know, seed phrases, hardware wallets. He thinks it just scares people off.
Those long lists of words can be intimidating.
Totally. He even brought up Hal Finney's prediction from way back in 2010, suggesting Bitcoin might just end up as like a reserve currency for banks, not something everyone holds directly.
And Gary Cardone, he seemed pretty frustrated too.
Yeah, he shared his own bad experience trying to use hardware wallets, called them frustrating, and he criticized Bitcoin's marketing, calling it horrific for making newcomers feel dumb with that not your keys, not your Bitcoin purity test.
The classic line.
His point was, look, we need to make it easy to get trillions of dollars into Bitcoin. And things like ETFs, custodial solutions, they do that.
Okay, so we have these two strong, almost opposing views. Ideology versus practicality, security versus usability. How does Simon Dixon suggest you, the listener, navigate this? What's the takeaway?
Well, he concludes it's not really a binary choice, not strictly one or the other. It's more of a spectrum.
A spectrum.
And let's be honest, most people starting out, they'll take the easiest path, buying on a centralized exchange.
Which goes back to his first point.
Yeah.
Just get off zero. Don't let the complexity stop you from starting. Avoid that analysis paralysis.
Exactly. But here's where Dixon adds a crucial next step, something he thinks is really important for your journey.
Okay.
He believes once you own some Bitcoin, you shouldn't just stop there. He really urges everyone to buy a hardware wallet, take some Bitcoin off the exchange, and actually learn how to use it.
So it's not just about the security aspect.
Not entirely. He calls it experiential learning, learning by doing. And he thinks this skill, managing your own keys, your own digital assets, is going to be vital, especially with things like decentralized identity coming, AI, and, let's face it, a growing surveillance state.
Interesting perspective. Learning self-custody is a future-proofing skill.
Right. So ultimately, the right way for you to store your Bitcoin, it probably involves a mix. Diversification, it depends on your situation, taxes, inheritance plans, how comfortable you are with security.
So this deep dive really shows that storing Bitcoin is about balancing these big principles with, day-to-day reality.
Yeah. The key message seems to be, don't let the fear of self-custody keep you from starting. Get some Bitcoin first.
Get in the door.
But then don't let the convenience of just leaving it on an exchange stop you from learning what makes Bitcoin truly revolutionary. Learn how to be sovereign with at least some of it.
Get in the door, then understand the power. That makes sense. Which leaves a really important question for you to think about. As technology keeps changing, as society shifts, how will your own approach to managing your digital assets, your sovereignty, evolve? Something to mull over.
Okay. Hope you like my little AI buddies, give you a little break from my voice as we do these Bitcoin hard talks. I got one more story in the Bitcoin section, and then we're going to go right into this week in macro. And then we've got the final section this week in geopolitics as well. So let's go straight into the final story. And this is an interesting one. If you're a long-term listener of Bitcoin Hard Talk, you'll know that we've shared this journey of America stating that it's going to be having a Bitcoin strategic reserve. What this essentially means is that the Treasury, which is independent of the central bank in the case of the US, can free itself or have an asset equivalent value of the balance sheet of the central bank in a case it ever needs to reform or do some of the monetary reforms that I've been sharing my whole career, even before Bitcoin was created. You can build an asset called a Bitcoin strategic reserve. And when you need to, in a time of crisis, you might be able to reshape the financial system and the Fed and implement some of these things like Ron Paul and Rand Paul and Thomas Massie have been advocating for over the years. This from the libertarian side as well. Well, America announced, and Trump kind of his entrance into the market was at Bitcoin 2024. And in Bitcoin 2024, this whole concept of doing a Bitcoin strategic reserve led to a bunch of crypto lobby and Bitcoin lobby giving him shit tons of money to get into his campaign. And then immediately he did an executive order to form a Bitcoin strategic reserve. And it was that it needs to be done in a market neutral way. What that means is they can't take taxpayers' money and print money to buy Bitcoin, which is actually better than printing money to buy weapons in the proof of weapons network. But anyway, that's how the proof of weapons network works. But if you can do it in a tax neutral way, i.e. America's gold is valued at 42 cents from the legacy gold standard system and the post-Bretton Woods pegs when the Nixon shock happened and they decoupled fiat currency from gold. but you could revalue it at today's price, which is approximately $3,400. And then you could use that value in order to accumulate Bitcoin, sell down some gold, or you could do a number of different assets in a tax neutral way. I mean, basically, you can't print money to buy Bitcoin was the executive order. Now, they've been going through all these different acts first. So Clarity Act, Genius Act, Anti-CBDC Act, as I said. But what they did reach upon is it didn't require an act of Congress in order to buy Bitcoin in a market neutral way, a tax neutral way, and also to essentially take the seized crypto assets and Bitcoin that the government and Department of Justice has stolen from those that engaged in criminal activity and were trialed for that, and hand it over to Treasury. And I talked a long time ago about how, but if it's held at the Department of Justice and there's an executive order to hand it over to Treasury, that's like a massive asset off this separate balance sheet. It's not like the government is one monolith. They actually have individualized budgets and balance sheets. And whoever's holding those Bitcoins, which wasn't apparently that clear, and there needed to be an investigation into that, which we haven't seen yet, but they would have to take off billions of dollars, like 200,000 Bitcoin from their balance sheet, and they'd probably prefer to sell it so that they don't have to transfer the Bitcoin. And so there was elements of whether that's happened, and it should be investigated. And that was real speculation on my behalf. Whether that was something that they would engage with in doing. And so there was essentially an update from the Marshal Office as a result of a Freedom of Information request. And it was updated on X, and people were trying to verify it. But essentially, over the last 4 years, and we don't have all the full details, and the blockchain analysis we couldn't corroborate with as well. But the US government has essentially sold off almost 80%, approximately 80 to 85% of all of the Bitcoin strategic reserves that it thought it had. And so my question immediately was, because I was saying, remember, America doesn't have all of those 200,000, because 119,000 I can see on the blockchain that were retrieved as a result of a hack. And there was a Department of Justice case where the exchange that was hacked, Bitfinex, and I'm also a shareholder in, I happen to know that those belong to Bitfinex. And so it turns out that those coins are still there. So this must be separate wallets, but we don't have clarity, even though we got the Clarity Act. So this investigation should happen. But immediately I asked, what happened to the 119,000 Bitcoin from the Bitfinex hack? Have they sold those? And if they have sold them, they owe the Bitcoin. And if they owe the Bitcoin, they were essentially short Bitcoin during this massive bull market, and they'd have to buy those Bitcoin back, which is a big problem for the department as well. But they still show on the blockchain. So I know those 119,000 Bitcoins are still there. Now, the US essentially admits that through this Freedom of Information Act and providing a bunch of data that didn't have blockchain analysis, that the US now only holds 28,988 Bitcoin, which is separate to that 119,000 Bitcoin. So the US officially has to transfer, or hasn't transferred, or holds it in the DOJ, but it was meant to transfer it to Treasury, 28,000 Bitcoin, which is a massive drop from the previously proposed 200,000 plus Bitcoin, which means that America is no longer the largest sovereign nation owning Bitcoin, and therefore either has to catch up in a tax neutral way and buy that Bitcoin, or it won't do that. And China is now the largest holder or government holder of Bitcoin reserves in the world, because our data shows that China owns approximately 220,000 Bitcoin, or 200,000 Bitcoin that they seized from, I think, the Plus market, was it Plus token Ponzi scheme or something like that. And so America's no longer got that spot. So this opens up a game theoretical scenario that China is essentially the largest government holder of Bitcoin, and America has to catch up. They can catch up on a market neutral way. There is an executive order that apparently allows that to happen without Congress. But at the same time, Cynthia Lummis is passing a bill or trying to get a bill passed, which hasn't made priority over Genius, Clarity, and Anti-CBDC Act. And so America does not currently have a significant Bitcoin strategic reserve, which means that it doesn't have the strategy to protect itself, which also means Thomas Massey's End the Fed bill couldn't be combined with a Bitcoin strategic reserve strategy. And so while America and the Trump administration are creating the environment for you to own your Bitcoin, make sure you do what the Trump administration is doing, follow his money, and protect yourself from America, because America is not protected. So you need to protect yourself. You need to understand custody and self-custody, and do not rely upon your government. Your government may have a slogan of make yourself great again, but when I follow the money, I see backhanded deals via stable coins that are making the Middle East great again, making China borrowed money being used and invested with through foreign direct investment, and a bunch of investment in foreign countries with Nvidia, which we'll be covering in the macro section, that is making BRICS great again, and making the GCC Gulf Council great again. And some things that might make America great again, as long as you own stocks, Bitcoin, real estate, because they are pumping the shit through fiscal dominance and socialism, quasi-communism, crony capitalism, whatever label you want to put on it. But the big, beautiful bill is no doubt a stimulus package, which is inflationary and will only benefit those that have assets. So make yourself great again. Because your government certainly ain't doing that unless you follow the money. The macro is getting worse. And so that's going to be everything we do for this week in Bitcoin, part 1 of Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 90. Just before I end and we move into part 2, we got a lot more we want to cover. In the macro section, I'm going to be going over what you can learn from EU and Japan and how that relates to what is next for US and China, just by analyzing those markets, and where the proof of weapons network is taking these markets. And in part 3, we're going to be going through the 2 stories, which is the connection between the Epstein files and all the drama that happened this week, and everything that happened in the Syrian war, and how those are 2 military operations that connect to the same types of monetary chains. All that we got to come. But I want to thank you, because each week I've been saying we need to get to 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. And we smashed past 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. But we're not going to stop there. So I'm going to be thinking about a little incentive, because I want to set a bigger goal. For as long as my voice exists, for as long as we go through this Bitcoin AI and central bank digital currency transition, I want you to help me reach as many people as possible. And now we get to have a review from YouTube. We unlock some silver badges. We have to apply, and my team's going to do all that stuff that needs to be done. But we need to set a new goal. And that is that throughout my lifetime, I would like to have as many subscribers on YouTube, presuming I don't get shut down, and hedge against that risk, as there are Bitcoins when all Bitcoins are mined. So eventually I want to have 21 million subscribers. But that's a big goal. And we got a lot of time to go through together in this transition. And AI is accelerating things, and everything's getting faster, and everything's getting weirder. So let's break it down. I want to get 2.1 million subscribers before then. But what is this short-term goal? Let's get to 210,000 subscribers so that I can have at least 1% towards 10% towards that eventual 100% goal of having a subscriber for every Bitcoin that will eventually exist. So do me a favor, share this. Thank you so much for helping me get here. 25% of all the people that watched to the end are not subscribers. And so please hit that subscribe button. There are several resources. I have no agenda, no ads, no advertising, no selling my soul to other podcasters to do sponsorship deals, just pure content with no agenda other than trying to get you to protect yourself as we share upon this Bitcoin journey and uncover the truth. And we get shadow banned, we get censored, we don't get organic traffic because they don't like the message that I put out there. Now things are improving, and I'm contributing to these algorithms, but I still need your support to get there. So the next goal is 210,000 subscribers, so that we can get to that fraction of Bitcoin for every single subscriber. So if you're not a subscriber on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button, hit the bell symbol, hit all. If you do not follow me on X, please go over there and follow me. I stream from there. And sometimes if YouTube censors or takes down the content, it still remains on X. In case that gets shut down, because I do get some people that don't like my content and complain about the truth because they don't want the truth to be there, those agents, then go to my Rumble, type in Simon Dixon and follow me there. I got a small following, but it's building every single week. If you're not on, if you want to watch this just by listening while you're at the gym or while you're driving, go to Apple Podcasts, look up Bitcoin Hard Talk. You can download it there, or do it on Spotify if you use Android or other devices, and you can get it there. And finally, everything's backed up on simondixon.com, where we have the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal, where I give content to anybody that's a member that has a free login. And then you get my newsletter every week as well, so you don't miss a thing. And all of any new content that I create, like these little AI summaries in real time. So please go ahead and do all of that. And that's everything I've got for you for this week in Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 90. And we're going to now move over to part 2, Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 90. This week in macro, what America and China can learn from what's happening in the EU and Japan. I'm going to have a little bit of water, put a comment, do a retweet, do the share, and then we'll go jump straight in with part 2. Okay, welcome back to Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 90, part 2, this week in macro. This week in macro, what's happening in the EU, what's happening in Japan, and what that means for China and America, the two competing trade war superpowers at the moment. We're going to be covering everything that happened this week in macro and mainly focusing on those two themes as well. If you didn't watch part 1, where I covered this week in Bitcoin and all of the different regulations that are happening in the Bitcoin crypto CBDC market that are leading to certain solutions that we'll be covering this week in macro, then make sure you go back and watch that. It will be available, or you can just jump straight in to part 2. Now, you'll know that if you've a long-term listener or a Bitcoin Hard Talk, that there is the Proof of Weapons network that has currently BlackRock as its fictitious CEO. If you don't know what, and by the way, I say CEO because it's the most important actor. It moves based upon the flow of funds, who has the power in the Proof of Weapons network. But if you haven't watched my blog on the Proof of Weapons network, I got a little summary that I gave there, an AI summary, or you can watch the full video where I give a full explanation. But I don't want to go through it in every single video. But essentially, it is a stateless entity that consists of the banksters, the corporations, the technical industrial complex, the military industrial complex, the financial industrial complex, the intelligence agencies, and their control over government through various blackmail operations and criminal networks, in order to create these black op operations and manage the different countries like a portfolio, particularly Western countries like America, European Union, colonies like Israel, the UK, and various other colonies of the previous UK empire as well. And so the European Union is currently being vassalized into the Proof of Weapons network. What that means is that the European Union and the European Central Bank don't use money for Europeans. They don't use policy for Europeans. They use it for the companies that profit from this vassalization. And essentially, a country just becomes a tool for corporate profits for the Proof of Weapons network. You become a tool of the portfolio. And so you get destabilization campaigns that work against the European people. You have uni-party, different operations like open borders and mass deportations that lead to destabilization campaigns. that they can use media in order to fuel racial tensions, religious tensions, that can lead to surveillance, that can lead to war progressions. They can use organizations like NATO in order to increase weapon sales, and they can use organizations like USAID to take over BBC funding in order to push out a narrative that leads to you justifying why money's not being spent on the people, but is going to Ukraine to push the profits of Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, so that then US corporations like Tesla that need rare earth minerals get to benefit from having the components of their batteries and various other things by funding militia groups like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, M23, M13 to engage in covert wars, and all of the apparatus that is set up around that. EU is going through a major destabilization campaign, and it has been, and it particularly accumulated in covert regime change in Ukraine, installing a puppet government for the military-industrial complex, and then antagonizing Russia through NATO expansion, so you could vassalize the land over to Russia, and BlackRock might be able to get some of those components for its portfolio companies. The latest thing that the EU is doing is it's decided in its infinite wisdom for the proof of weapons network that the EU has approved a new round of sanctions, a lower oil price cap. This is the 18th round of Russian oil sanctions. None of them worked, but yet they think that this oil price cap is going to fool enough people into thinking that they're sanctioning in order to stop Russia while they're profiting from the whole war and everything that happens as well. So let's move into common sense corner and analyze this a little bit more. Firstly, what does a price cap on oil do? It doesn't affect Russia. It does affect the partners like EU. So when EU needs to purchase this oil, and it essentially, it's going to harm the European Union more than it's going to actually harm Russia. So let's look at some of this. We've had 17 rounds of sanctions that have failed. And sanctions essentially lower oil prices for who? They lower oil prices for the ones that are buying from Russia, which is China and India. And India is then selling it more expensively because it's got a cap from these sanctions to the European Union. And this just raises the price of oil for Europeans, which creates more revenue for Russia. What else does it impact? So we're told there is currently an artificial intelligence race, which there absolutely is. But Keir Starmer from the UK is saying they want to be a vital part of the AI race. And if you want to be a vital part of the AI race, you need cheap electricity, which requires cheap gas, which was switched off when they sanctioned Russia and the CIA blew up Nord Stream pipeline as part of the proof of weapons network campaign to destroy Germany's manufacturing base. And yet some EU members basically have the world's highest rates of electricity due to costly gas because of these sanctions. So this is strategically weakening the economy. And then private equity firms at BlackRock get to purchase up all those assets. Foreign nations get to purchase assets in distress, like Thames Water in the UK, and they get to buy water assets in distress. If Russian oil production is cut in half as a result of these price caps, then the European economies will collapse because they need to work with Russia. And this was a campaign to weaken it. And that's how you know that our leaders and the European Union do not work for the Europeans. They work for the corporations, and we've all been vassalized into the proof of weapons network, which is represented by the BlackRock portfolio companies now. And so what does Trump do in reaction? Trump says, Oh, right. Now we've done that humiliation ritual where Zelensky was kind of moving over to Europe. We get to pretend we're the peacekeepers. And I send JD Vance over to Europe in order to do a humiliation ritual. And then suddenly you all increase with Zelensky your NATO budget to 5% so that the euro dollar can be pumped and spend all that money back into American corporations. Via all the corruption that happens in between, so that you create more inflation in Europe, and you get to strengthen the euro relative to the dollar as these tariff policies are being negotiated. Trump basically says, right, Putin's a bad guy. He's no longer the person of peace. Every time we want peace, they bomb more. So we need to send more weapons and we need to print more GDP. And we need to have some fake growth from the big, beautiful bill. And we're going to get NATO to pay for it so that we can have a currency play as well. So Trump has come out and said he's now going to impose severe sanctions on Russia if there is no war deal made within 50 days. We've already seen all the sanctions. This is what led to the creation of BRICS, that led to the de-dollarization, that led to all the networks so that they could trade with each other, that ended up empowering China and partnering with Russia and Iran, where we ended up with this power struggle that led to the installation of Trump in the first place, so that we could the world's order could be reset through tariff policies, which only pushes people closer to China and BRICS due to the strategic alliances and the wars and everything that's happened that we cover in the geopolitical section. So what have we seen as a result of these tariffs? Well, many Chinese factories are now simply moving to Vietnam. And Vietnam is negotiating their tariff policy. And so you are pumping Vietnamese economies, the large corporations. The ones that can't afford the tariffs, they're going bankrupt, and essentially the large multinational corporations being done a favor by the Trump administration through these tariff policies for the proof of weapons network that has a very diverse portfolio that can now strategically acquire all of the bankrupt companies and consolidate them, just like happened in COVID with a different flavor. So now Vietnam released the highest export data it has ever had as a result of this. So you can see what's actually happening as well. There will always be ways around this because the dollar doesn't dominate anymore and we're in a multipolar world order. So it strengthens a multipolar portfolio, as we've covered as well. So companies will keep finding workarounds because they don't work anymore. And this is driving the adoption for BRICS, which is why $1 trillion have been traded amongst BRICS countries. And now they've all been forming partnership between the ASEAN countries, the BRICS countries, and the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, GCC, ASEAN, BRICS, all trading with each other as a result of these tariff policies. So Trump is basically also this week implemented high tariffs on Brazil that the US is basically in a surplus with. So US is in a surplus with Brazil and implemented high tariffs and enters into some kind of theater with BRICS and Brazil and lots of things going back and forth, even though they're in a surplus. Make this make sense. At the same time, he's making enemies with his most important trading partners, more important than China, which is Canada and Mexico. And then also engaging in an EU vassalization campaign by having tariffs on, tariffs off. I think they went from 50%. Now they're going to be between 15 and 20%. But all of that has done is pushed all of these regions further east rather than further west. But obviously, they will work as a block because they're being vassalized. But the corporations that they're being vassalized into are all multinational corporations that have no America first, no EU first, no UK first, and install puppet governments to serve their agenda. That is why nothing is working, because these Western countries are being vassalized into the proof of work network, because the financial industrial complex securitized and financialized everything And now the assets are controlled not in the interest of the people. And so this is that globalization movement. And what else are we seeing? So as we enter into these trade doors, we're seeing that the global corporations like Nvidia, the second largest asset in the world that has a $4.2 trillion market cap, is now suddenly, because they're global in nature, they're able to export their Nvidia chips to China. And so this is leading to being able to support trade, despite the fact that it's meant to be anti-trade. Why? Because the proof of weapons network wants their Nvidia stock to go up, and it went up to a $4.2 trillion market cap because it went up $170 overnight, just based upon a backdoor negotiation that Trump is negotiating for the proof of weapons network and for Nvidia, that led to the announcement that H20 chip cells are able to go to China, and they're able to resume despite any of this quote unquote trade war that's resetting the world order. And so they've also rolled out basically a fully compliant GPU, which is graphics power, for the China Communist Party. And so they are trading with the CCP because the proof of weapons network can circumvent all this. This just simply gives more power to those large corporations. That is what and that is why Trump is doing everything that he was installed to do for his backers. And so Trump is being basically a fantastic job for hyper accelerating BRICS, the proof of weapons network, and BlackRock. And we got a new tariff this week, which was a 93.5% tariff on battery components from China. Now, this has a big impact on Tesla, Ford, General Motors, and Lucia, and some of the prices on these different components. It pushes the price of the raw minerals like lithium and cobalt and graphite that are all mined globally, which increases the profits of these globally mined products. And then America needs to pay more for them because they don't process them. They're mainly processed in China. And then you have these higher prices, even though you have to also pay the import tax as you import them. Now, if those components could all be made in America, then fine. But during this destabilization phase, that's going to be an inflation. It's a tariff on the American people. It's an additional tax as a result, leading to a weakening of the dollar, as we've been covering, which is leading to the cost of borrowing increasing, which is leading to this type of destabilization campaigns in the US between the Federal Reserve from the Proof of Weapons Network and the Trump administration, which is going around in this merry-go-round of destabilization, distraction, and resetting the world order into this multipolar world order, while everyone can profit from the volatility and pumping the shit out of those share prices for those that own assets, as well as neutral assets like gold and Bitcoin as well. So tariff on components are basically made with these materials and drive up global prices. So this is inflationary pressure. We haven't seen the inflationary impact of these tariffs yet, because the next round of deadlines come in the 1st of August. Then there'll be a lag. Then there'll be people trying to beat those deadlines based upon the speculation of what they're doing next. But in the end, the companies that need these batteries, i.e. electric vehicle cars, normal cars, storage units, solar batteries, all of these different things, they can only go up in prices. And this is more a weakening of the dollar. And where are you actually going to build these things while you have a short-term build of your manufacturing base? It's going to be done on AI and robotics, which will take out those jobs eventually, which is why no matter what, you need to focus on making yourself great again, because I'm not sure how this all goes. Well, I'm pretty sure how it goes, and we'll keep sharing the journey in This Week in Macro, This Week in Bitcoin, and This Week in Geopolitics. But let's look into some of the numbers. Okay, so DXY is a basket of currencies mainly the euro is the largest component against the dollar. As long as that is going down below $100, it had a little rally up and it is now weakening again. And so the trend since Liberation Day is a downward trend in the dollar. It's now at 98.22 cents after this little rebound that we had. And it's been a low of below $97. We also had announcements and reports that the New York Times said that Trump is going to be sends a letter to the Fed chair, Powell, in order to try and say, you're fired or please retire. Again, there's this public argument, and they've been priming this ability to have essentially the next federal chairperson, the so-called shadow chair, when Powell has to leave in May 2026, but to render Powell useless in that time by having it, knowing that he's leaving and what will come next by Trump installing his type of person that's going to essentially build a perception that they're going to push rates right down, the short-term rates. And so what is this all doing? It basically means that the long-term rates to lend to the US government, the 10-year treasury, it is now broken and is about to break the 4.5. It keeps going there. So that means the US government debt and the 10 trillion that needs to be refinanced, that is currently at an average of 3.3%. It can only be the cheapest way to refinance it is by doing a bit of a short-term Ponzi by getting short-term rates down, but the long-term rates are going up. So you can't borrow, or you can borrow at the long-term rates, but you have to pay a much, much higher yield on that. And the yield on the 30-year rates is already broken above 5%. It sometimes fluctuates a little bit, but every time we get one of these destabilization campaigns, it tends to follow with a weakening of the dollar and an increasing of the rate to borrow, because the plan, as we've covered, is this whole fiscal stimulus and refinancing it with short-term debt. So if Trump thought that bonds were basically high after Liberation Day, which liberated the world from the dollar, and he had to capitulate from that strategy because the bond yields, the long-term yields, really went up and it was in real distress. They've since corrected a bit since. Wait until he sees what basically comes if he successfully gets Powell to resign or is fired. It would be a destabilization campaign that most people believe would send the long-term rates soaring and strategically weaken the dollar as well. And so the Federal Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell, came out this week and reportedly said that he's considered resigning. I'm not sure to believe that. I'm not sure. I don't think it's actually going to happen. But the shadow chair of the Fed can be announced, and they can do that strategy as well. So we'll see what happens in that destabilization campaign. Lots of volatility, lots of profit for the proof of weapon network and the financial industrial complex as well. And remember, this is the same time, if you watch part one, that Bitcoin is rising and continually reaching new all-time highs, while treasury yields are rising and essentially going up as the US dollar is falling, and gold prices are generally rising as well, even though they've had a little bit of a correction. So what is the answer? Why is that all happening? It's because everything is about US deficit spending is out of control and nobody can be the person that controls it. That's why Elon Musk strategically decided that he would capture for the proof of weapons network, I believe, some power plays that I'll be going through in this week in macro. I covered a little bit about my speculation on this power struggle between the technical industrial complex, financial industrial complex, and military industrial complex, those parts of the proof of weapons network. But essentially, looking at the numbers that just came out, last year, the US run, last month, a $70 billion deficit in June. There was actually better figures, so there is some good news. There was actually this year, there was a $27 billion surplus, but that was due to front running of tariffs that brought in the additional revenue and the additional growth. So we got to wait for this to roll out till we'll actually know But the Treasury actually has its projections. Already this year, the US Treasury is running a $1.3 trillion deficit. And that is based upon year to date to July or whatever the date is today. The estimate is that by the end of the year, it's going to be $1.88 trillion deficit by the end of the year, if we believe their projections. And so $1.8 trillion is what they're estimating will happen. Big Beautiful Bill allowed for $3.3 trillion with a $5 trillion cap over the next 10 years as well. So what was that compared to last year? If we're doing 1.8 trillion this year, last year it was 1.2 trillion. So the deficit is up from Bidenomics. Trumponomics is more aggressive. Bidenomics. And the money's going to the war machine, as we covered in previous aspects, and the surveillance state, and various other things as well. Tax cuts that essentially took away from those that were on Medicaid and handed over to corporate tax cuts, which are meant to be creating jobs, and the job figures are strong. Growth is strong when measured by GDP and measured by the stock market, but that is wealth transfer from those that don't own assets to those that do own assets. And that's the issue. That's what's causing the civil unrest right now. That's what's causing the depression. That's what's causing the boomer generational divide and all the things that are happening right now. But this year already, this deficit's getting worse, while the GDP has fallen as well. So Trump's tariffs revenues are basically hitting record highs. And so Elon Musk decided to strategically capitalize on that. And I'll be covering a bit more on that as well. But so far, tariffs are only generating $100 billion so far this year. I think it's going to be approximately $300 billion. Now, that is a large increase. And I expect it to go up because I think the tariffs are real. These aren't negotiation tactics. This is a proof of weapons network strategy to reset the world order. But these tariff rates and income is set to rise. And at the same time, we had the US Consumer Price Index inflation numbers this week, which showed that there is a reversal on the downtrend. Now, it's early doors, it still doesn't exclude the impact of tariffs. But the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, was slightly higher at 2.7%. I think expectations were 2.6%. And this is the first time in 5 months that they were higher than expectations. But it was a little bit confusing because the Producer Price Index, which is inflation for the products that are needed to build components, that was flat. And so that was slightly off as well. And so the impact of the Big Beautiful Bill, while it's hit the stock market, which is a leading indicator, it hasn't actually had its impact on inflation yet. And that's why Jerome Powell is basically saying we don't know what the impact of tariffs are, so I can't reduce rates. Until we know, we'll watch the data and we'll analyze the impact. This basically marks the beginning of a reversal in the disinflation trend. So it went from 9% to approximately a lower 2.4%, and now it's up to 2.7%, which means it didn't hit the 2% goal, and it looks like it's headed towards the 3% target now, which I think is going to be systemically built in, and we won't know the impact because we've got this artificial intelligence creating disinflation. We've got to figure out what the impact on productivity relative to all of this debt and this divide and civil unrest that's happening, and all of the Trump policies through this fiscal domination and excessive printing and rolling over the debt that is inflationary in nature, as well as resetting the world order into a multipolar world order. Do you understand why Bitcoin is so much simpler than trying to figure out all this stuff? But we will do mathematics and gymnastics every single week in order to try and help you get through this stuff. Whereas Bitcoin, the monetary policy, is known through proof of work anytime into the future because it's enforced by maths and code, and nobody can change it. You have to play around with it, and you just don't get any type of chance to change it And that's why people are flocking to Bitcoin as well. So I think 3% consumer price index is now on the horizon. And I think we're moving into inflationary policies where they kind of take different things out of the index. But we're moving to inflation based upon Trump policy. So what did Trump do? He basically called out, and I quote, that the Fed, he called out the Fed. He said, cut rates by 3 points. That will save $1 trillion a year would be saved. He's right. It would save $1 trillion a year, but only on the short-term rates because the long-term rates will go up. So you're getting closer and closer to a debt-based Ponzi scheme that needs to be rolled over every month, and it's still going to be higher than the 3.3%. But if you cut by 300 basis points, which has never happened in history of the Federal Reserve, then you get to sell those bonds and you get to roll it up, probably back it by stable coins now that the Genius Act has passed, if you want to do that, and use some crazy types of tools. But essentially, this is rapidly moving to an acceleration of an inflationary environment as well. What does it mean in an inflationary environment? It means asset prices surge. What does that mean? Well, let's have a look at Japan as well. So we've done the European Union, the destabilization campaign, the vassalization that the proof of weapons network that I believe America is being used for its capital market, and its proof of weapons network portfolio companies, but the people don't matter anymore. And the only way to beat it is to own the assets. So what's happening in Japan right now? Remember, the Bank of Japan is a useful tool for the proof of weapons network, the Japan carry trade, in order to get free money to speculate on US stocks and various other assets. What's happening in Japan? Basically, treasury yields, just like in America, have basically silently surged to record highs. And so they're going up with the 30-year yield on Japan debt has now hit 3.2% this week. Japan's 30-year government bonds have lost 45% of their value since 2019. So remember, as they lose value, that means any bank in distress who has to hold it to maturity can end up with a distressed bank situation because you get to mature it, but as the price goes down, but you're compensating for a lower price by a higher yield. And, these are the types of things that can cause distress in foreign banks. Foreign banks that are connected to the American banking system, whether it's European Union or Japan, these types of trends can cause the types of distress. And so the Bank of Japan is basically got unrealized losses from this government bonds that hit a So what happens when you're trying to stimulate? You can only stimulate through debt in these situations. And now Japan's debt to GDP ratio has now exceeded 260% for the first time in history. That is the highest, in the world, 260% from a major economy. And their long-term rates to borrow are going up. So their debt to GDP ratio is roughly double what it is in the United States. And this is the same policy that Trump is following. It increases the amount of interest you have to pay as you go into an inflationary debt spiral. And ironically, the US is currently in a far more unsustainable position because Japan at least has a major trade surplus. Now, Trump administration said through Doge, they're going to move to a trade surplus, but that policy's gone. Big Beautiful Bill said, no, we're doing trade deficit. We're continuing on the same path. So although you got a trade surplus this month, we need to watch that because it's a projected $1.88 trillion for this year. And so this is more unsustainable than the Japan situation. The Bank of Japan owns approximately 52% of all government bonds. So the Federal Reserve is going to be the one that owns those bonds for its shareholders that has to pay a 6% dividends to the banksters that own the shares. And Japan's consumer price inflation is basically, excludes fresh food, has accelerated to basically 3.7% year on year in May. And so this is the fastest rate increase and inflation increase pace since January 2023. This is exactly what the Fed wants to avoid and what Trump wants to reverse. So Japan basically has a policy rate of 0.5%, even though we've got this, so it's pushing it down, it's pushing down those rates. And you have a debt to GDP ratio of over 250%. Germany basically has a policy rate of about 2.25%, which is 4.5 times higher than Japan, and a debt to GDP ratio of only 62%. So this is a quarter of what's happening in Japan. However, the 30-year government bonds in Germany and Japan, they both yield the same 3.1%. So this is just crazy economics in Japan through the destabilization campaign and vassalization of Europe. And also now Japan is moving closer to China as a result of everyone being pushed east through these tariff policies, which is meant to increase some of the revenue in America. So this is uncharted territory. We've never seen anything like this. Maybe you can compare it to the post-World War II manufacturing-based economy where it was all built upon war. But that's when America had a manufacturing base. This is not really comparable given the current percentage of the size of the economy relative to these deficits as well. So no politician wants to be the one to cut spending, despite the fact that there are rising runaway deficits. This is the trade deficit that is running away. Japan is basically just foreshadowing what could be next for many, many countries around the world as a result of these proof of weapons network, including the US. This could be the strategy because nothing adds up. There's nothing sustainable about it. And what is China doing in order to protect itself is basically loading up on oil. So while China, it looks like it's doing massive growth right now because it keeps buying more and more oil, it's buying massive amounts of oil. It's buying that from China. It's using its own sources of alternative renewable sources to build its own supplies. It's buying it from Russia. It's buying it from Saudi Arabia. It's buying it from Iran. And China is the most important client of the GCC, of the BRICS nations, of the ASEAN nations as a result of these tariff policies. And it is loading up on the largest oil reserves in the world right now. That's kind of in preparation for needing to be self-sovereign, preparing for the eventuality that there may be some kind of war, which I know the Proof of Weapons Network will look to make up for lost profits. We'll save that for the geopolitical section. In the geopolitical section, I'm only going to be covering the Epstein stuff and the Syria stuff as well. Next week, I think we'll cover more on the China side and the European side in terms of the Proof of Weapons Network and the geopolitical escalations as a result of this new world order that's coming through, this multipolar world order. But China is essentially becoming more important than OPEC Plus is, and it could become more important in terms of if it wants to reduce the prices of oil. So it can now build autonomy and have an important flooding the supply or using the supply with its vast oil reserves at the same time as America's strategic petroleum reserve and Trump's drill baby drill goals are not being met. So there is a depletion of the reserves in America and an increase in the reserves. And what did we have in part one? There was a depletion of the Bitcoin strategic reserves as well. So at the same time as chips being made in Taiwan that are required for Nvidia and the largest market cap companies in America, at the same time as being able to control some of the oil markets, as well as the easing up. That's why these negotiations are happening. That's why Nvidia is able to sell chips to China right now, because there is a power struggle that has already been done, and it's also got the manufacturing base. So that's what is happening on the trade war side, and that's why you're seeing a loosening up of these different things. And this very, very changing time, which is what leads me to believe that geopolitically, that I cover in more in 3, why we're entering into a new phase rather than using the old model to analyze geopolitics of how things have always been. We're entering into a new phase because the military industrial complex needs to make up for lost profits that I believe are going to come out of the Middle East as a result of these negotiations that I'll be covering in part 3. And therefore, it needs to go deeper into the EU and Asia Pacific regions, because that's where the military industrial complex from the proof of weapons network, they have the vassalization of Japan, Philippines, Taiwan, European Union, so that they can just become tools for the military industrial complex, financial industrial complex, and technology industrial complex as the world resets around those. And so there's resistance against those, as we see, which is Russia, BRICS, China, Iran, and things that were covered in the BRICS summit last week. So the technology industrial complex is essentially looking to take some of the market from the financial industrial complex as a result of all the acts that we covered in part 1 in This Week in Bitcoin, Crypto, and CBDCs. And it's also, as AI becomes a tool for some of these battles and cybersecurity becomes a tool that's being weaponized, cybersecurity and artificial intelligence are basically drawing the military industrial complex into the technical industrial complex. And so we're having this asset management by the proof of weapons network based upon going all in on technology, and debt being backed by stable coins and these new tools and surveillance and civil unrest, domestically, as well as the tools that we use to destabilize regions in the Middle East. They're coming home. And that's why you're getting these campaigns that are happening within Europe, while you're getting countries like Japan stepping away from the carry trade and over to these vassalization trades, where BlackRock ends up, through trade policies, consolidating into the large corporations, and making up for these sources of profits for it. So then that brings me to the types of things that we're seeing that we're going to be covering in part 3, which is the Epstein files and their connection to the proof of weapons network. And so in This Week in Geopolitics, this is going to be everything we're going to cover in part 2, This Week in Macro. We're going to be covering the 2 stories of the Epstein files, Trump, Musk, and all of that network. We built upon it last week, and you can catch up on those videos from last week. Or you can go through, we're going to be doing 2 different stories in the geopolitical side, even though there's more I'd like to cover. There was a lot happening on the Russia-Ukraine side, and there was a lot happening on the China side. I'm going to save those for next week. But I want to build upon these 2 stories of how are the Syria escalation and the Epstein files, are they coming from the same proof of weapons network? And what does that mean that we need to analyze? And I'll be analyzing all of that in This Week in Geopolitics in part 3. So I hope you enjoyed This Week in Macro. I hope you enjoyed This Week in Bitcoin, part 1 and part 2. In part 1, we covered the Clarity Act, the Genius Act, the Anti-CBDC Act, and where the Bitcoin strategic reserves of the US have gone from 200,000 to 28,000. In part 2, we covered what's happening in the EU destabilization campaign, the Japan campaign based upon these tariff policies, and what we can learn for the future of China becoming more like an OPEC oil country, and also US and its depletion, but its movement towards a technocracy as a result of some of these proof of weapons network plays and vassalization plays that we're seeing. So if you enjoyed that, then please do me a favor. If you're not a subscriber to my channel on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell symbol, hit all. We have now passed 100,000 subscribers, and the next goal is to eventually get to 21 million subscribers, one for every Bitcoin. But in that journey, we want to get to 210,000 subscribers as the next goal, so I can share this message with more people and help more people adjust and prepare, because this requires preparation for a world of Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies that we're moving towards. Now, YouTube is now going to do a bit of a review. And in case that review goes badly, follow me on X. I do all these streams over there, and I do lots of X spaces. You can come up and engage with me and ask me questions over there as well. In case that goes wrong, download this Bitcoin Hard Talk podcast on Apple or Spotify if you use Android device. Then you can watch parts of it and come back to it later as well, and do it with no extra time while you're in the gym or the car. Also, in case all that goes wrong, I back it up on what's it called? Doing a mind bog. The company that Tether invested in, the video streaming, Rumble. I do it over Rumble. I'm trying to build my follows there just in case everything goes wrong. And if you aren't a free member of the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal at Simon Dixon, then you can head over to simondixon.com, and that's where you can find all the blogs and all the updates and all the videos and all the AI summaries and all the different previous content, so that you can binge to protect yourself in this world of Bitcoin, AI, and CBDCs. Put a comment below, share. I'm going to have a little bit of water. We got a bit more for you. We're going to be doing part 3 this week in geopolitics, and we're going to be focusing on Syria and the Jeffrey Epstein files. Welcome back to Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 90, part 3, where we're going to be discussing a proof of weapons network double game. We're going to be covering the Jeffrey Epstein files and what it means geopolitically, as well as the Syria war, and by following the money, what it really means, who all the different players are, how it relates to you in the West, or the different power plays that are happening, and the future of the region as I see it. So let's start with the Epstein files. And this was a strategic escalation by Elon Musk, a big player in the proof of weapons network representing the technology industrial complex. Trump, a politician that also is a business person that mainly aligns with the legacy financial industrial complex of the proof of weapons network. There is a power play and a power struggle. But both of those are controlled by the asset managers like BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, because they have large share positions in all of these companies across all of these portfolios, as well as board seats and the most important voting shares. So this week, let's cover what happened this week, and then I'll go through following the money. And I'm also going to do a little bit of an AI summary because I released a new blog this week on the relationship between Jeffrey Epstein and Trump. I did what last week we did the AI summary of Trump and Epstein and Mossad. This week I'm going to be doing the relationship between Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. And I did a blog on it where you can watch the full thing, and a documentary by Ryan Dawson if you want to go deeper, but I'll also play the AI summary. But firstly, let's go through what happened this week. Then we'll go through following the money, the AI summary, and then we'll go through Syria. So buckle up. Elon Musk basically came out this week and said on X, the government's quote, the government must have a list of, I won't say that, RAPISTS. I don't want to get banned on any of my channels, AKA the Epstein client list in their possession. And they must release it right effing now. So, lots and lots of colorful language as we escalated this. Remember, last week, the FBI said that basically the Epstein client list did not exist. Nothing to see here. FBI, Department of Justice, no client list. We don't need to release anything, despite all the contradictions. And this enraged the Trump supporters, even across America. Democrats and Republicans aligned around a shared vision that we don't want, pedos in our country coming after our children for blackmail operations and taking care of the crimes against humanity that are being used through sexual violence in America as well. So the convicted felon, which was the handler of Jeffrey Epstein, the son of Robert Maxwell, the Mossad super agent that engaged in Iran-Contra affair and weaponizing Iran and funding ISIS and Al-Qaeda for Western interests and creating those proxy groups and various other things. His daughter, Ghislaine Maxwell, who was involved in the Bill Clinton blackmail to end Oslo Accords and make sure there was no Palestinian state, as well as other operations. And if you read the book by Whitney Webb, One Nation Under Blackmail, it goes through the funding of the White House and the Clinton administration. And then the Epstein house had that picture of Bill Clinton wearing Monica Lewinsky's dress and the painting, various other things as well. Ghislaine Maxwell, who is in prison, who was convicted, also says that she is willing to speak in front of Congress about the Epstein files. So this creates a very uncertain situation for the proof of weapons network and all of the banksters and financial industrial complex that are all settled. And we know all the different parts of the victims and who they exposed in the banksters and the financiers of many things. So it won't be released, but we seem to be getting this game. And so Ghislaine Maxwell said that she is willing to testify before US Congress about the Epstein files. And that was reported by the Daily Mail. The proof of weapons network control Rupert Murdoch empires that consist of billionaires that are also aligned with Zionist ideology that also control many shares in the proof of weapons network as well, top of the power structure. So media is able to be weaponized as needed. Maxwell said that she's willing to reveal Jeffrey Epstein's client list as well in the same article. And also it was released that the metadata from the Department of Justice raw Epstein prison footage reveals that despite what the Trump administration said, that approximately 2 minutes and 53 seconds were removed from one of the two video files that was meant to be released, that was meant to be evidence that Jeffrey Epstein hung himself and there was no infiltration. So what we were told by Bundy, that it was 1 minute that was taken out, it was actually 2 minutes and 53 seconds by the metadata. So there's more and more lies. And the video was then spliced basically together from the two files that she gave some reason. In the documentary, I cover all these videos if you want to see that as well and you want to catch up on all this stuff. That's all on the blog that I'll be sharing in a bit. I'll give an AI summary so that you can catch up quickly if you don't want to do the whole thing. But the cut occurs just before basically the well-known missing minute. And so there's inconsistencies there. This is sending people that are investigating this stuff absolutely doubting and strategically weakening the Trump administration. The Department of Justice has basically came out and said, right, we're going to fire Maureen Comey, who was basically the prosecutor in the Sean P. Diddy Combs case and the Ghislaine Maxwell case. And so they're throwing the prosecutor under the bus when it's already too late. And they become the fool person, I guess. So we can say they're the person that needs to be fired. There was an article that came out that said Trump allegedly says that Jeffrey Epstein is basically had a letter, and inside the letter there was an outline of a naked woman for basically his 50th anniversary, and that was according to the Wall Street Journal. Trump denies all these allegations and basically saying that this never happened. Quote, he said, I never wrote a picture in my life. Very strange back and forth happening as well. Trump continued to call the Epstein files basically a Democrats' hoax, just like Russia. And this was done by Obama. And then he even said it was done by Biden. And he tries to stop himself. So it's incredibly inconsistent despite everything. We covered all of this last week. So, just giving the updates on what happened. Blame Obama, blame Biden, say that the Epstein files don't exist, say that it was a hoax. But this one is sexual violence and victims. And, this is a very serious one. You can't just, have Russia come out on this one. So the Trump base is becoming really, really split. And so what I wanted to do is do a couple of things. I wanted to go into the AI summary of the blog that I created that looks into Trump's background and his background with and connections to Jeffrey Epstein and various other networks. And then after that, we want to follow the money, connect it to what's going on with Musk, and do a little bit of projecting around what we think comes next and what this is really about for the proof of weapons network. And then we'll move over to Syria. So what we're about to play, Azad's going to get it ready. This is an AI summary video, and it's from, if you go to simondixon.com, there's a blog post that's called "Is Trump Blackmailed by Epstein?" And there you can get the full documentary, the full blog post, and you can find all of the details and source files for anyone that wants to dig deeper into this stuff. So without further ado, Azad, do you want to play the AI summary for the Jeffrey Epstein and Trump AI summary?
Welcome back to the deep dive. So today we're tackling a question that keeps coming up, really, especially with all the interest around the Epstein files still swirling. The question is Donald Trump being blackmailed by Epstein? It's complicated. Our deep dive today is going to synthesize findings from Ryan Dawson's documentary, Trump's Zionist Ball and Chain. It offers a pretty specific perspective on the whole environment that shaped powerful figures like Trump.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is how this source material, it doesn't just look at things in isolation. It tries to weave it all together, systems history. It brings up this concept from Simon Dixon called the Proof of Weapons Network. So our mission today really is to explore how this network is presented, how it supposedly operates, and it kind of prompts you, the listener, to think about what it means when power operates, behind the scenes.
That's a great way to put it. So this Proof of Weapons Network, can you unpack that a bit for everyone listening? How does Simon Dixon's framework say it actually works to keep governments subordinate?
Right. So the framework basically lays out three main tools this network allegedly uses. First, you've got investing in politicians, grooming them early on. Second, there's buying influence, campaign finance, lobby groups, that kind of thing. And then the third tool, if the others don't work, is blackmail. And the Epstein saga, well, within this view, it's presented as a really clear example of that third tool, a control mechanism.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And the documentary, it really digs into the setting for this, right? New York and New Jersey real estate. It describes it as, I think the phrase was, a cesspool of organized crime and corrupt pay-to-play government. Yeah. The argument there is that bribery, blackmail, it's not unusual. It's just how state contracting works. There's even a quote from a consultant saying, in Jersey, you give money for results, not just access.
Exactly. And the source suggests that within this environment, there's a group described as Zionist ideologues. And this group, according to the source, uses its wealth to push certain interests, influencing American money, media, military power. The documentary basically positions this as the world Trump. And also Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, learned to navigate, even master.
Okay, so following that line of argument from the source, the marriage between Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner isn't just personal then, it's presented more like a merger, right? Uniting two big real estate power wings in that NYNJ scene.
That's the portrayal. Jared's father, Charles Kushner, a convicted felon. The source claims his empire was built with some ruthless tactics. He was a big political donor. But the documentary alleges that when, say, bribery didn't work, he resorted to more extreme stuff. It points specifically to his conviction for setting up a honey trap, luring someone into a compromising situation, recording it against his own brother-in-law, because the brother-in-law was cooperating with investigators. And the film also alleges involvement in setting up Governor McGreevey, similarly, which was later used for blackmail. It's presented as a very direct use of that third tool we talked about.
So what about Trump himself in all this? The source seems pretty clear that he's shown as being part of the same world, navigating these networks to build his own empire. Like for Trump Tower, the documentary says he used S&A concrete, which the source identifies as controlled by Fat Tony Salerno, a big name in the Genovese crime family. And his connection was Roy Cohn, the infamous mob lawyer. There are also details about a judge finding Trump conspired using underpaid non-union Polish workers for demolition work, while a mob-linked union looked the other way. Even his Atlantic City casinos are shown having deep ties to organized crime figures, according to the documentary.
Right. So when you look at all that historical context, these patterns presented in the source, it brings us back to the core question for you, listening. Can someone apparently so deeply involved in a system like that truly be independent? The conclusion drawn by the source material is, well, for this proof of weapons network, a leader with that kind of background isn't a problem. Actually, the suggestion is he's a predictable asset because he already knows the game, he's played it. The documentary asserts the Epstein network itself was created precisely to control these kinds of powerful men. So whether Trump was a direct target or just, a product of the same system that allowed Epstein to operate, the ball and chain, as the source calls it, is presented as real.
So the final thought for you to consider is this. How does understanding this idea, this proof of weapons network, and this alleged historical mix of power, money, influence, how does that change your perception of political independence? Just a reminder, the core research we discuss comes from Ryan Dawson's documentary, Trump's Zionist Ball and Chain, synthesized by Simon Dixon. As always, we encourage you to keep exploring these complex topics with a critical eye.
Okay, hope you enjoyed that summary. So we got two more parts in This Week in Geopolitics. I'm going to do an analysis based upon the assumption, based upon that documentary, and you can go find out the sources and dig yourself around your perspective of what it would mean if Trump is actually compromised and if the proof of weapons network players are also simultaneously compromised, which I believe to be the case based upon what I've learned and following the money and understanding power dynamics. How would you be able to take advantage of that? And that's what I think happened this week in geopolitics with the Epstein files. So let's look at the proof of weapons network power dynamics. Let's dig a little bit deeper. So what happened this week? Elon Musk, representing the technology industrial complex of the proof of weapons network and that faction, was completely relentless to push for the release of the Epstein files, as we covered in the beginning section. This is completely clashing with Trump's claim that the client list doesn't exist. So Trump looks like a complete liar. All you have to do, 5G chess, backward thinking, and question your beliefs. You either believe at this stage that this is Q, trust the plan, and you'll believe anything, or you recognize that there is a level of compromise happening here. And this is really problematic because many different factions that kind of supported Trump now don't support Trump, and you're left with just kind of the radical cultists. That's all that's kind of left, or people that just think there is some codified thing that's happening here. So I don't think that Trump is in charge of the files. Put it that way. If he wanted to release them, I don't think he can release them. And I think Elon knows that these will never be released as well. So if Elon knows that they can never be released and Trump can't release them, then Elon, knowing that the people that are on the top of the chain of the proof of weapons network and the deep state actors can't implicate the financial industrial complex in them, then he also knows that they can never be used, and he can use that in order to gain some strategic power for his agenda. And so I think that this is all that lies into the genuine power play, and what can be used is Elon Musk can fragment for the technical industrial complex the power that Trump has. So even though Trump has been doing a lot for the proof of weapons network, mainly the technology and financial industrial complex. He also has a lot of power because he is one of those cult, he has this cult following, and he's also a wild card. Like, he can say things that are very unpredictable. I don't think he's scripting everything. You can tell the difference when he's reading from the script and he's just going off on his own mode. And so you can use this in order to keep basically Trump in a bit of a survival mode by weakening some of its cult following. And so Elon's call to release the Epstein files, I think they're not about exposing the truth, because he knows that it can't come out. He also knows that Jeffrey Epstein was targeting many of the PayPal mafia and the technical industrial complex, as covered in the documentary. It's a weapon to essentially erode Trump's MAGA base and basically pull some of the voters towards his own cause, knowing that Trump is compromised, but it can't be released and Trump doesn't control it. So that gives him a lot of power here. So he's utilizing it while he can. Trump has basically been very loyal to the proof of weapons network, as I covered in This Week in Bitcoin and This Week in Macro. We are full blown into the multipolar world order that I think BlackRock has invested into, and that was covered in previous section. Trump's struggle to basically hold MAGA together draws him closer to being an asset for the right faction of the proof of weapons network. And so basically, this is a proof of weapons network friendly policy implemented by Elon Musk, is how I see it when understanding the power dynamics. And really, the proof of weapons network, they win by both players, because Elon's one of the players, Trump's one of the players. They got shareholders in both of the positions. Both of them are doing what they want to do. Some of them are unpredictable. Some of them are less predictable. But if you take away some of the control, and you can profit from some of the volatility, it's kind of a win-win game in this game as well. So I don't think it's about paying down the national debt, and I don't think he cares about the Epstein files being released. I think it's a power play and a game that basically you've got Trump as the golden boy, and he's pushing deregulation as the proof of weapons network wants. He's pushing the corporate tax cuts as the proof of weapons network wants. He's pushing policies that basically help their profits, that allow them to consolidate smaller corporation bankruptcies into the large multinational corporations. Is implementing policies that help the multipolar world order. And he's been basically a very reliable proxy for the proof of weapons network in the case of vassalizing the US into this stateless control network. And he's been delivering all of the financial and tech for the financial and tech sectors. But why not be able to control it further, knowing that you won't release this and weaponizing this unique opportunity around the Epstein files? And so, this is because he's a risky bet and he's a little bit volatile, and you don't know, whether he's going to be able to do that. So destabilizing his base and his supporter base keeps him compromised and keeps him faithful to the proof of weapons network, while simultaneously ensuring that he's in line with the different priorities. So I think that's what's happening here. This also aligns with, I shared some posts on X. Make sure you follow me over there. From Evan X, account that I follow that does a lot of these game theoretical work. And then I combine that with my understanding of the proof of weapons network, as well as some of the documentaries and summaries from Ryan Dawson. This is really becoming a team effort to put this together. And then in Bitcoin Hard Talk, I can kind of get ahead of the money and share out what I think is actually happening as well. So I think this means that we're more likely to double down on this multipolarity and the vassalization of America and that Musk is there to basically remind Trump who's the boss. And while you have power in certain plays, the proof of weapons network has power in the Epstein way, but knowing that it can't be released, how do you weaponize Elon Musk and his X control in order to strategically weaken? So I think that the proof of weapons network has control over the Epstein files, whether that's the Mossad faction, the CIA faction, one of these black op operations that's a subsidiary of Lockheed Martin, whether it's through some of these different operations that are funded by controlling the oil through the Kurd proxies within Syria. But I think somewhere in the proof of weapons network, which the deep state, which is subordinate to the network and a tool of the network, I think that's where the Epstein files are. So I don't even think Elon or Trump can release them. And I don't think they will ever be released. And I don't think it's ever going to happen because those that have the power are implicated as well. So it's just simply a weapon based upon a scenario that can keep basically leaders in check and aligned to the proof of weapons network, on top of the lobby money, on top of the blackmail operations, on top of the various other network. And remember, most people think that when I say Mossad, that means Israel. Israel is controlled, and Netanyahu is just middle management, like Trump is, that have their own power structure, and Israel is a tool for the profits of the military-industrial complex. And so when Zionism is no longer a strategic asset, because you want to dump Zionism for military profits and destabilization campaigns and replace it with rebuild and capital inflows, which is, I believe, the negotiated settlement that we're witnessing in the region right now, then you have to put the case forward that finance makes more money than the lost military, and military gets to make that money up in Europe and Asia Pacific. And so that's what I think is happening with the different power dynamics and following the money and kind of the game theory, putting together different thoughts and different types of things. So that's the Epstein files part. I hope you enjoyed that and you can start to analyze things. You can go over to my blog if you want more details and you want to see some of the source documents behind some of the things I cover here. But the other big story and the final story for today is what happened in Syria. So there is a lot of things going on that I've been prepping people, but all eyes were on the Syrian escalation. And so if you remember from previous episodes of This Week in Geopolitics, I've been covering over the week that I believe that the negotiations have happened, but there are different escalations based upon things not going to plan and gaining more power dynamics by taking over different territories. But eventually, all the players are moving towards this normalization of the Middle East, negotiations with the different power brokers, with the proof of weapons network, and a movement towards decolonization from the American proof of weapons network, so that forever wars end and eventually we get replaced with this environment of mass growth and mass investment and mass capital inflows. And that was as a result of BRICS aligning with the GCC and the ASEAN countries, and then US having to strategically retreat because it was no longer the global hegemon. And then the GCC buying and doing deals with Trump led to the issuance of stablecoins as discussed in part one, that then changed the macro environment through tariff policies that reset the world order, as we're discussing here. Don't want to go through all of that. Anyway, you can catch up on that in part one and part two. But I was talking about how eventually there is going to be Netanyahu exit, and he's trying to be as useful for the military industrial complex part of the proof of weapons network. And he's negotiating his strategic exit, which doesn't involve going to prison, but does involve probably him disappearing and not being held accountable for his crimes. And he's got leverage that he's negotiating. And that's why this has gone on longer than it should go on longer, and why more people and the genocide is being worse than it should be based upon the current situation. So he's trying to show his full utility to the military-industrial complex, which will eventually be exhausted. And then we get the strategic exit, the financial-industrial complex takeover, which requires a non-Zionist extreme cabinet government within Israel, a movement towards two-state solution, one-state solution that eventually will lead to vassalization and weakening of Israel because funds are being pulled, but they're only being invested in distressed assets, which the GCC will buy up on the cheap as kind of the leader in the region for that block, the Gulf Cooperation Council. And then obviously BlackRock and the financial industrial complex want as much deals as possible with the technical industrial complex for their companies, which is why Nvidia is building up the region with AI data centers. And then there's nuclear program negotiations, which requires Iran's cooperation, which requires Palestinian solution so that you can harness nuclear energy and become a data center for all of this artificial intelligence. It requires the territorial disputes to all be resolved, and it's going slower than I originally thought. It's getting more aggressive, but I think we're still moving in this direction. Obviously, if the Palestinians get completely ethnically cleansed and the area gets completely taken over, Hamas start resisting, then this analysis would be a point at which we've gone wrong. But right now, following the money and following the power dynamics, I believe that for all the reasons I've covered in previous episodes, that this is exactly what is happening right now. So the next move that I said needs to happen is Netanyahu exit and the strategic destabilization campaign of the Israeli cabinet. So the MIC can stop essentially, and FIC can stop, the military industrial complex and financial industrial complex can stop propping up Israel so it can go to the vassalization phase that I just covered as well. So what happened this week? So we had the International Criminal Court chief prosecutor. His name is Karim Khan. And he came out and was basically told and threatened. Remember, we had the Blackmailed operation where one of the judges in the court case said that Mossad agents were threatening their family and the children, and they had to come out publicly on TV to stop that from happening. But this week, Karim Khan basically was told to, was told to drop the arrest warrant against Netanyahu and Gallant as well. So these are two key players in the cabinet. And if he and the ICC would continue to do that, then they will be destroyed. And so we've had these sanctions that have been inflicted via the proof of weapons network, deep state proxies, via Trump, via the US government. Basically, Netanyahu on the Monday, after doing the delays by attending the White House appointment, he had to attend his local Israeli corruption court charges. And so there was the first sign that he's facing those charges locally. And there was a campaign to make sure his international criminal court corruption. So these are his corruption charges and his war crime charges as well. And so I think he's fighting for survival and taking attention away, because the more war there is, the more he gets to be useful, the more profits for the military industrial complex, and the more negotiation power, which is the painful, disgusting process that we're going through right now. Now, always remember, I haven't got my humanitarian hat on right now. When I go through that, I'll tell you at the very end, the disgusting crimes against humanity that are happening right now. Right now, I'm on my analytical, which isn't what I want to happen. It's just analyzing what I believe is happening. And so that the court case was on the same day that there was an escalation. And so what happened? Israel launched strikes on Damascus, Syria. So this is the capital of Syria, a massive escalation. And I genuinely think this caught most people off guard. This wasn't one of those theater pre-warned. This was, I think, out of the plan. And so I just want to give you a quick recap because Syria is ultra complicated. We've covered it multiple times in the geopolitical section, but let me just give you a bit of a summary so that you can understand more of the complexities and nuances, because Syria is one of the hardest ones to understand, the different factions. So you know that the military industrial complex and the deep state, they fund different groups. So when you hear about ISIS, it's just a rent. It's a militia as a service and different intelligence agencies. It was created through American wars, funded through USAID. And then Israel and America would use these torture camps to radicalize people and turn them into intelligence assets and have infiltration at the highest level. And by destroying economies and sanctioning economies, you can build these little militia armies that can fight for your Western interest. And then you can pretend that it's like something to do with radicalism for religious, even though it doesn't identify with any of the religious beliefs. So that's how these militia groups works. And many countries use them. Russia uses them through Wagner. Iran uses them through Hezbollah and various other genuine resistance, but also funded. And so therefore, who funds then has to attach their agenda. So you have Qatari interests, you have Iran interests, and America through organizations like MS-23, M13, and ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and various other ones as well. But let me remind you of what's happening in the Syria side, the key players. So there is a militia group, which is a combination of genuine Syrian rebels and a group called HTS. HTS, in simple terms, is backed by the Gulf Cooperation Council, GCC, and Turkey. And so that represents their interests. So when I hear HTS, they'll tell you it's just this group that of Syrian re-liberation. I hear GCC interests, Turkey's interest in the vassalization of Syria. When I hear SDF, which is the Syrian Defense Force, and I hear about the Syrian government, and I hear about the Kurds, which is a leftist, Marxist group of people that don't have a home but are located in Turkey, in Iran, in Iraq, and in Syria, they're essentially backed by US interests. But US in terms of the financial industrial complex, because they occupy the oil in Syria that funds some of the black op operations for their slush funds for weapons trafficking, humans trafficking, and drugs trafficking, American operations. But mainly the financial industrial complex represented mainly by Trump right now. So this is why Trump's talking about removing sanctions, essentially freeing oil, removing sanctions, and allowing Syria to use its wheat. That's being used by American force, which is represented by the Syrian government right now, the Syrian Defense Force, and the Kurds. So you've got HTS, GCC in Turkey, SDF, which is American interests, and the Kurds, which are American interests. Then you have the Druze. Now, the Druze faction off into, they're a different ideology and a different group, but some of them were offered Israeli citizenship and are aligned and were, factioned off in Israeli borders and Israeli citizens. And so some of them hate Israel. Others are aligned with different forces, but there is a militia side to them that represents and are aligned with Israeli interests as well. And so when you think of Israel, you think of colony of America that represents the deep state US military industrial complex, as opposed to the financial interest. And so you've got the Turkey GCC, you've got the US banking financial industrial complex represented by Syrian Defense Forces, GCC and Turkey HTS, and now you've got the Druze and Israel, which is the US military industrial complex. And then you've got a few more regional players, which are part of the GCC, which are aligned with various parts of BRICS, i.e. Russian interest, China interest. And so one of those is UAE, which is in bed with HTS, Remember, GCC. Sorry for all of these things. I told you it's complicated. I'm doing my best. And this is their interest, is that they invested in an $800 million deal to develop Tartus Port. And Tartus Port was originally a port that gives access to the Mediterranean Sea that was negotiated between the previous Assad regime and Russia. And so Russia and UAE are kind of in a partnership through strategic investments and normalization. And now with the Assad regime overthrow, because if you've watched previous episode, I believe Iran agreed to that. Russia agreed to that. The GCC agreed to that. US forces agreed to that. Israel agreed to that. And so therefore it was allowed to happen with the way that it happened. But I don't believe that UAE is behind, this current operation, or any of the players, in fact, are behind the current operation. I believe right now, because we're moving to this normalization that requires the end negotiation of the Iran financial industrial complex deals and the Palestinian solution, and then the vassalization of Israel, all into a one-state solution over the years ahead, with GCC being the power in the region. The UAE, as part of the GCC at large, Turkey, Iran, they're all on the same side when it basically comes to Syria at the moment. And so this didn't make any sense. But who is negotiating additional strategic power? Israel. And so Israel representing military industrial complex, and the other groups representing financial industrial complex for the proof of weapons network. And US isn't doing anything because they said desanction. Some of the Kurds forces started demilitarizing, and they haven't sent ISIS in. They haven't sent an Al-Qaeda proxy, which is through a disruption campaign via Israel or military industrial complex. So I don't think that this was planned. So what is this then? So the speculation based upon following the money is that the Druze were essentially in the region that has now been conquered, which is Suwaida. Suwaida is a region within Syria. And basically, it caused a bit of a chain reaction because I believe that there was a resistance between the Druze that are meant to be aligned with HTS, which is GCC and Turkey interest. And so Turkey and the GCC, they need to push back harder via HTS, and they need to push harder on Syria because essentially they looked weakened. And I don't think this was planned, because Israel then came in and saw the opportune moment and said, all right, here's an opportunity. We'll pretend that we're defending the Druze, and we get an additional chance to weaken HTS by essentially hitting some of their military defense, and basically consolidate and secure its own interest in this negotiations between financial and military in the end normalization phase. And so it essentially used this opportunity to immediately, as violence broke out, which I think was genuinely between HTS and Druze, I think Druze were just started to work on their own autonomy and their own interest. And so Israel decided to weaken the HTS and basically keep Syria as fragmented as possible so that it can have additional power, additional territory in the eventual negotiations. And so just so you know, Israel does not give a damn about Druze. That's the narrative. That's how they always spin it. That's how it will always be told to you. But the proof of weapons network and the proof of weapons backed SDF from the financial complex, they're not. They basically have created a bit of a mess here, and it's led to escalation for no point of escalation, and it's a bit unsure about what's actually going to happen next. Now, I do think it moves towards normalization, but Syria essentially is weak. And the STF has basically, we're deciding, are they going to hold the ground? But Israel took over some of the territory. And I think that was to negotiate better terms, as we also give Netanyahu strategic leverage, also a distraction campaign as part of his exit negotiations, which coincided exactly with some of the civil unrest campaigns that we're seeing within Israel. And we'll cover what happened this week as well as the final part. So essentially, STF, representing US financial industrial complex, their real leverage is essentially control of the fields, is control of the oil fields and the wheat fields. And it's the fact that they're also backed by the military industrial complex from US that profit from this. So STF at the moment, they seem to be prioritizing autonomy over normalization, which I think is leading to this uprising, and the regional players need to renegotiate and use some more aggression. And this is not a good sign, basically, because Syria is not looking good. And so I was on Spaces and we were covering all this in real time. But there was rumors that Jelani, the leader, was taken back to Turkey. I'm not sure if that is the case, but it's not looking good. And so that's the current situation that's happening in Syria. And there was an eruption, basically. The Druze resistance inspired the STF to jump in. Now, the different power factions are not aligned. HTS is fighting the Jews, the Kurds, and then there's all the other different types of groups, because Syria is the most complicated. I just gave you the main groups as well. So I think the GCC need to step in. Israel seemed to be showing more strength and dominance here. So the different negotiations and the proof of weapon network that essentially sees the chaos in Syria, this could derail everything. You know, these operations are fluid, and this is a risky part of the operation. And so I think essentially the proof of weapons network is kind of hedging both sides. It's got Israel military industrial complex. It's got SDF financial industrial complex. And it's got the occupation through the Kurds of the different resources. And it can either go through massive fragmentation and destabilization campaign, or it can negotiate with HTS, Turkey, and the GCC, try and get more power. And right, what else have I got for you? So Israel basically jumped in. They started bombing, and they got more territory. They're starting to say the narrative of protecting borders. They do get to protect the borders, but hopefully this doesn't go into chaos, and the leaders in the industry can get hold of their militias and factions and take control of it. But at the end of the day, there are a lot more greater profits in reconstruction, in oil deals. And I believe that forever war is not the model. This is what I think all the players in the region need to get to. And I don't think any of this has got to do with Iran-backed militia. I think Iran has sat back, and they're just engaged in the separate negotiation with the US and what they're going to be doing there. So basically, as it stands right now, I think the Druze, I think the ex-Assadis loyalists and the different factions, I think Israel, I think they're all on the same page at the moment. But Israel's got a little bit more strategic power representing military, more profits. And more death and destruction is the way that this satanic, demonic network works. They get to play both sides while playing the regional players, allow them to figure out the stability and see which one lends up. So I'm not sure exactly what's going to happen next, but we'll keep covering that one. But all eyes are on Syria and what comes next. And I think if we don't have massive changes, next week I'm going to be covering more on the Russia, Ukraine, and China situation as we try and keep up with all these different proof of weapons network plays. So let's go into the final parts of what happened within Israel and whether we're moving on that target. So at the same time as this strategic this escalation, which I think Israel seized upon, even though I don't think it was planned. Maybe it was planned. But the cabinet in Israel are being weakened. The reason that was happening is we started to see that within Israel, it's a strategic a cabinet that is aligned. It is a coalition cabinet, and it relies upon different factions all maintaining intact. And two of the major that represent Orthodox Jewish people, that essentially treated, they get to practice their Judaism, they get to be Orthodox Jews, and they don't engage in joining the IDF. They don't engage in the military operations. But they're basically were told that they need to join the army and the IDF through forced conscription. And in resistance against that and in protest against that, two of the parties have basically said that they're going to leave Netanyahu's party, which is the Likud party. And Likud party was connected to all the terrorist regimes and his father that created Israel in the first place, that basically created the terrorism industry. But if these two leave, this is the fall of the cabinet. So I think this is part of the cabinet fall regime that I've been predicting will be coming next. And even if one more falls, that basically takes out the coalition. And the coalition means that the majority would no longer stand, and it would collapse. And so this would need instant new elections, I think, is the outcome from that. So Netanyahu needed a distraction, which kind of lines up with the Syria campaign and the Druze escalating. So one could argue that that's part of what this operation may be. But Netanyahu right now, in order to survive, he needs to show strength for the extremist Zionists that are engaging in all the settler colonialism and terrorizing the Palestinians right now and conquering more land within the West Bank. And he needs to support that. And that's why we're getting this massively disgusting expansions that are happening there. But at the same time, we're getting the Western exposure campaigns where more and more people are finding out about this as well. So I do believe that this is part of the Israeli strategic weakening into a pariah state, a bit like North Korea, what they tried to do with Iran. And I do think that more and more condemnation around the world. There were meetings where 16 leaders met up to say how they can form strategic embargoes to make sure weapons don't get from America through controlling shipping routes. More and more of that is happening. So it's being strategically weakened into a pariah state. And at the same time, the Syrian president, as a result of this operation, who was aligned with normalizing with Israel, basically came out and said that Israel is seeking endless chaos in the region. So he blamed it on Israel, which most people thought he was a proxy for Israel. And some people would believe that, but I think he is a proxy for Turkey and GCC. He said that over 1,000 confirmed young victim is a shockingly large and tragic number. That's the people that died in this operation as a result of Israel expanding their territory by taking advantage of this. And basically, Israel is now coming out and saying that they're looking to repatriate Druze and expanding their borders. And now Syrian forces are deciding whether they're going to withdraw. Sueda, some of the strategic territory, was now occupied in a ceasefire agreement. And now there's resistance against that ceasefire. And there was a joint statement by basically Saudi Arabia, Jordan, the UAE, Bahrain, Turkey, Iraq, Oman, Qatar, Kuwait, Lebanon, and Egypt. And they quote basically says, it affirms that the unwavering support for Syria's security and unity and stability and sovereignty, and they basically were all condemning and rejecting Israeli repeated attacks on Syria and Damascus. United Nations came out, America came out, Marco Rubio came out, and so all around the world there was universal condemnation for what Israel did. And Israel also, at the same time as this, started killing and attacking Christian churches within Palestine. And so the Christian community were being bombed. That led to deaths. That led to injuries for the priests and pastors. That led to the destruction of the oldest churches in the region, where Jesus Christ, if you're a Christian, Prophet Isa, if you're a Muslim, and if these are the oldest territories in terms of theological scriptures. And so the Pope himself had to come out and do a call with Netanyahu, warning Netanyahu that Christians shouldn't be targeted. This has happened before, but now the media started covering it, when before it wouldn't have covered it as well. Trump basically came out and made there was public statement that he's upset when he heard about the Israel attack on Gaza, referring to the Christian attack, even though in Israel, this has happened and they systemically spit on Christians in certain regions as well, and warned that to get Netanyahu on the phone right away, whether that's theatrics, but Netanyahu, and that was a report from Axios, and Axios is kind of Mossad, CIA, deep state control media as well. So more military industrial complex aligned narratives, but you get to see what types of narratives they're putting in, which is consistent with, is this part of the negotiated exit and the destabilization campaign within Israel? Immediately after the Syrian attack, U.S. State's Department spokesperson came out and said, Marco Rubio, I believe, that the U.S. does not support Israeli strikes on Syria. I genuinely believe that U.S. immediately sought to stop this as well. And there was a lot more anti-Zionist, messaging that were happening on mainstream American and Western media with podcasters like Tucker Carlson, Candace Owen, Joe Rogan. So I think this is consistent with the next phase of the operation, but I think the Syria side pushed it back a bit. And remember, now I'm going to put, while we put all eyes on Syria, I just want to end with a little bit of humanitarian eyes on Gaza. These are the final power play battles, I believe, between the regional players, the US military, the financial industrial complex, Israel, Iran, Turkey, GCC. But I want to do an end with a bit of humanitarian side, because the genocide in Gaza is getting worse and worse and worse. The starvation campaign, the famine campaign. And I want to remind everybody that WikiLeaks said that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is US backed and executed via Israel because they wiped out UNRWA, which was the organization that was able to distribute food. They did that through their atrocity propaganda, actually done by one of the co-founders of Celsius's wife, Daniel Leone's partner, who works for propaganda and released different articles connecting UNRWA after leaving the Celsius Ponzi scheme scam as well, to connecting UNRWA to October the 7th and then using the atrocity propaganda. Make sure you watch the blog with the AI summary of atrocity propaganda, help you understand what October 7th is. Covered that one last week as well. But now you know what that is. The US basically is opening this Friday just one concentration camp for Palestinians receiving their food. If you watch any of the footage that's coming out, it is crimes against humanity. It's a complete exhaustion campaign, how I feel at the end of Bitcoin Hard Talk, but to a tiny, tiny degree. These are people that are starving, that have been in over 630 days of this, that are completely exhausted, that have been fed lies after lies after lies, that are now going through a deliberate famine campaign by targeting wiping out 70% of all the infrastructure, taking out the working hospitals, deliberately not allowing gas or oil to get to the hospitals that are needed, making the hospitals completely unusable, no ability to cope, constricting aid, constricting water, constricting everything that's needed, limiting it down to bare minimum for survival. And now Palestinians are going through brain damage as a result of this, because of the fact that they're going through severe malnutrition. They're going through severe starvation campaign. We've had deaths as a result of that. And now what's happening on the economic side? Israel sent in their ISIS proxies to, whenever the aid got in, take away the aid, say that's creating hyperinflation. And so there's gangsters in the group that are now taking the aid, selling it on for profit. And the Palestinians that have any money left, they're having to go and beg for external funding. They're cutting off the financial rails. We covered this before. Like, all the Binance accounts were closed in centralized accounts. They wiped out the banks and financial institutions. They're censoring any PayPal campaigns and various other things by using the proof of weapons network. And they're making sure, even in a hyperinflationary environment, that they can't get the money that they need in order to get this. So it's absolute crimes against humanity. This is what backs the dollar. This is the full force of the proof of weapons network. This is the exact cyber campaign of how this works. And they'll give you all the lies and pretend that it's not actually happening. But remember, this is fully American funded, fully backed up by the Israeli terrorists that are inflicting the actual IDF. So IDF actually admitted that they were given instructions to sniper. I put some footage out there of the sniper campaigns. And the people that come to these essential concentration camps to try and get some aid, they either come back completely empty-handed and exhausted, or if they're one of the people that was massacred, they're killed, or they come back completely wounded. That's the reality of this. And that's the deeper meaning behind why I try and expose the flow of money and try and help you understand the importance of boycotting this system. The way that I know how to do it is to boycott the Federal Reserve, which is the source of propping up the dollar by this violence. And you can do that by owning Bitcoin outside the Federal Reserve system. Boycott the BlackRock and the key players of the financial factions of the military-industrial complex by holding your Bitcoin in self-custody rather than holding it with them, giving them more economic power in charging you fees. Boycott the banks by continually owning more Bitcoin each month and playing that 4-year cycle, so that by the end of the 4-year cycle, you never look back. Can't promise you future returns, but previously, that's meant you grow more economic wealth so that you don't need to borrow and you can end up buying houses rather than taking out mortgages, because the cost of a house when priced in Bitcoin always goes down. The price of a house when priced in fiat currency always goes up. And then when you've got economic power, you might want to use lobby in order to create a next generation of politicians that fight against that power. Or maybe you want to use it in order to be able to engage in strategic boycotting. Use your money for good, become more conscious around what you're doing with your money, spend local, spend on your local farmers. It's good for you, it's good for your health, it's good for everything. And be able to grow more economic power so that you can control the flows of money. If we all do that and we all get more people to be able to understand what they don't want you to understand, which is why I rely upon you to share this content, because I'm heavily shadow banned. We got past 100,000 subscribers. Thank you to everybody that got us here. We need to get to 210,000 subscribers as the next milestone. So if you've enjoyed this content, subscribe, hit the bell symbol, hit all. YouTube will message you every time I go live. Follow me over on X, and I'll make sure that you can interact with me in real time. If you send me a message, we'll come up on some of those spaces. And I've got a backup of all the live streams over there. In case we get taken down from those networks, Rumble, we're doing live streams over there. Follow me over there. And if you're into podcasts, you can subscribe, follow my channel, Bitcoin Hard Talk, on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And finally, in case we get completely censored and they don't want this message to go out on all platforms and I get cancelled, then join my mailing list on simondixon.com. And in exchange, I'll give you access to a newsletter and all the free resources you need to manage your transition in a world of Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies. So always remember, you are alive at one of the most interesting and exciting times in financial history. Those on the wrong side of the proof of weapons network are having crimes against humanity committed on them. Those on the right side need to build the economic power in order to be able to change the system. And I think we can do it with as much peace, love, and unity as we can by exiting the system. And so I'd like you to be on the right side of that change. And this was everything I'm going to be covering in Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 90. In part 1, we covered the different acts that are being implemented, the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve, and everything that happened this week in Bitcoin. In part 2, we covered the EU destabilization campaign, the Japan debt-based Ponzi scheme, and what it means for China, BRICS, the different regional players, and the US vassalization and artificial intelligence transitions, and everything that happened this week in macro, tariffs, and everything else. In part 3, we covered deconstructing the Epstein files, understanding whether Trump is compromised and how Elon Musk is utilizing that and some of the power dynamics, how that led to the events that happened in Israel, the Middle East, and Syria, and some of the power dynamics that are happening in Syria as after entering into a time of relative peace with atrocities happening is being destabilized again. And hopefully it gets back on track, because eventually there needs to be negotiation, there needs to be normalization. And I think that's the direction that we're heading to over the months and years ahead. So I will continue, and I will see you this week, this time next week, for Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 91. And leave a comment below and let me know what you think. I read all those comments and I'll answer to you. Peace.